with Tooth Nation, we are thankful to conduct our work electronically within their territory. And with that, I'd like to call to order the regular council meeting of the 27th. All right, so let's start off with the approval of the agenda. Can I get someone to move the item, please?
Carolina moves.
Carolina moved. Bruce second. I'm going to unmute council for this conversation. Rob Baig. I'm having trouble finding Rob Baig on here. Rob, can you unmute yourself? Oh, you're unmuted. Perfect.
I am.
All right, perfect. Lisa, you have your hand up?
Oh, that was for seconding, but
Oh, got it.
I was still on mute.
No problem. Thank you. So, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
None opposed? Motion carried. Next item is adoption of the minutes. Can I have someone to move the item, please?
So moved.
Lisa moved.
Second.
Carolina seconded. Thank you. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
None opposed? Lisa, you got your hand up again?
I had my hand up to move the motion.
Got it. Don't worry about it for the moving the motions. We'll do vote like with your hand up on the screen, and that's just
Okay.
for comments and questions. No worries.
Thank you.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. And none opposed? Motion carried. We have no delegations, so for 5.1, Lorna, would you please outline the next report?
Yes, your worship. We've been working for some time with the Evangelical Layman's Church with the view to issuing a temporary use permit to them for the use of their tea room. And as we progress through this time, one of the items that we worked on was to determine if we were able to provide road access. However, Metro Vancouver Parks have denied road access, and we are now leaving it up to Evangelical Layman's Church to advise us of what arrangements they will make as we move forward to have access for the tea room. And in addition, they have asked to expand the area of the tea room to include the building beside that, and it's outlined on the plan attached, to have a bread making room or building. And outlined in the report are the conditions and the notes as we're working through them with ELC to reach agreement so we can issue the temporary use permit. Some of the conditions have been met, and we continue to work with ELC on this matter. The reason it came back today is to have council approval for the expansion of the area for the tea room to include the bread making room building, and that ELC will provide us with their access plan when they have that ready.
Thank you. Can I ask someone to move the item?
I'll move it. Carolina moves.
Carolina moves and seconded.
I'll second.
I'll second.
I think Lisa got to the second first. Thanks. Any discussion from council? Rob, go ahead.
I have a couple of questions just in this regard. My understanding is there's going to be no road access available, and I'm just looking at notes here, and that the access will be on foot or by water. Then I noticed Brian's on, so maybe he could fill us in a little bit on what that access is going to look like and what the expectations are if it's going to be boat traffic only on Ferrer Cove in that area of Belcarra.
So Rob, the motion is actually includes that the Evangelical Layman's Church will provide us with an access plan. So it doesn't have to be figured out yet. So Brian, if you'd like to comment now, you can, but this is revising the terms that we need to have an access plan, but it's not actually on the spot. This is part of what we're discussing now.
I could go either way. It's up to you guys.
Please go ahead, Brian.
So I've been talking to Lorna about this issue and also Neil. So we are kind of planning to bring people by water, and we're looking to buy a boat to shuttle people from Belcarra Park and also the Rocky Point and North Shore. And also people who are, during the summertime, there are a lot of people hiking and walking down to the camp. And so those people. So I could write all this down, and I'm going to present this to Lorna later, but that is kind of our plan. Now, regarding the bread making that room as well, it can be water access only, and also the foot traffic only for now. Now, of course, all these issues will go away once we get the new access road in. Yeah, so I'm hoping that the new access road will improve in the near future. So basically, that's kind of our plan for now. Yeah, and we just need to make this work and keep our feet moving until that new access road comes in. Yeah. And I know that there are a lot of successful businesses out there that are water access only. Camp Jubilee is one of them, I'm not sure. And we do communicate with Camp Jubilee regarding and working together a little bit going forward in the future.
Thanks, Brian. I see no other questions. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
None opposed? Motion carried. Item 5.2, Ken, would you like to outline the report, please?
Can you hear me?
We got you.
Okay. So on the agenda are two bylaws for council's consideration. The first one is a 2020 annual tax rates bylaw, no 560 2020. Could you expand the report a little bit, Paula, please? That's better, thank you. And the second bylaw is a alternative municipal tax collection scheme bylaw for 2020, bylaw no 562 2020. And the first annual tax rates bylaw, according to the charter, has to be passed by May 15th. And it reflects the tax rates that are needed to collect the approved 2020 municipal taxes and that council has approved via its financial plan bylaw. And then also the tax rates that are required to collect the requisition from the Metro Vancouver Regional District. So if you look at the actual bylaw, there's a schedule to the bylaw. That includes the tax rates. A very old term for these were mill rates. Some people like to refer to them in the good old days as mill rates, but in these days we refer to them as tax rates, and those are the rates that would be charged on the tax notices per every $1,000 of assessed value in the various tax classes. We do not establish the TransLink taxes, the school tax rates, and the rates for the other taxing authorities via this bylaw, as they are established by those taxing authorities, and they send them to us, and they also will be reflected on the tax notice, but it's not required for us to set those tax rates. That's left with the purview of the other taxing authorities to set those rates. That's why they're not included in this bylaw. So that's the first bylaw on the agenda for council's consideration. The second bylaw on the agenda.
Ken, why don't we move the first one and address that before we get to the second one?
Sure.
Okay, so we have an option here, council. We have an option with the current legislation having been amended to do 3 readings and an adoption all at once if we're unanimous, or we can do just three readings. Is there any opinion as to whether or not if you'd like to do 3 readings and adoption, or just do 3 readings and then we've got to have this done by the May 15th rate? No hands?
Yeah, one hand.
Oh wait, Carolina's got her hand up. Go ahead,
Yes.
Carolina.
Okay, I'm not mute, right? For principle, I will never be in favor to do 3 readings and adoption in one meeting. I don't even like doing three readings in one meeting. So I can't support adopting it today. So.
Bruce, did you want to put your hand up?
Yes, Neil, thanks. Yeah, in our last meeting, we took advantage of this to do 3 readings and an adoption. I just don't think it's a good idea on principle. If we're in an absolutely critical situation and can't arrange a special meeting to do the final adoption, I would consider it. But yeah, I agree with Caroline on this. I'd rather stick to 3 readings and have a separate meeting to do the adoption.
Hey, we had this conversation last time and it went a different way. It's no problem. We'll do the same thing this time. We'll go with the way that everybody likes. So we'll just look at the 3 readings. And so can I get someone to move for the first 3 readings, please?
I can move that.
Lisa's moving it?
3 readings.
Yeah, 3 readings. And Bruce is seconding it.
That's a second. Yeah.
All right, thank you. And any other discussion? No other discussion? No one from the gallery has got their hands up. All right, all in favor?
I
All right.
None opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Ken, if you can go into the second bylaw, please.
Yes. We'll just wait till it pops up on the screen here. So the second bylaw, under municipal legislation, there's a general tax scheme, which is the normal scheme that is in the legislation that is the July 2nd due date and a 10% penalty applying right after that due date on July 3rd. So that's the scheme that everyone uses if they don't have an alternative municipal tax collection scheme. So under the alternative municipal tax collection scheme, one can vary the due date, and they can vary the penalty and interest dates as well. So as you know, many municipalities are considering this because of the COVID situation. And so this bylaw keeps the July 2nd due date, but it provides some bit of relief for taxpayers in that the 10% penalty wouldn't be applied right on July 3rd. 2% would be applied for late payments received after July 2nd. And if they pay after September 2nd, they would incur another 8% penalty. So it provides for a staggered penalty to provide some relief to taxpayers. And this, of course, varies from the general municipal tax scheme, that should only include a 10% penalty right on July the 3rd. So the province also has dictated or stipulated that the due date for classes 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 properties, generally light industrial, heavy industrial, business other, nonprofit, and recreational. The tax due date for those classes of property would be October, the penalty date would be October the 1st. And so there's wording in this bylaw that says, because Belcarra has a few class 8, 6, and 8 properties, the 10% penalty would only be applied on October 1st for those properties should they pay late, because that's a provincial exception that we have to provide for. So basically this bylaw provides for the alternative municipal tax collection scheme. to vary the penalties and stagger them, but it does not change the due date. That due date would still be July 2nd of this year. And there's some wording under the legislation that says that taxpayers have to be given the opportunity to elect whether they want to go with the either the general tax collection scheme or the alternative municipal tax collection scheme. And so they can make a written election to go with the general tax collection scheme if they so choose, but it becomes a moot point because I don't think anyone would want to go with the general tax collection scheme when they found out that they would be paying a 10% penalty as opposed to a 2% penalty on July the 3rd. So basically, and if they don't make any written declaration, the alternative municipal tax collection scheme applies, the 2 and the 8%. So this does recognize that there has been some hardship due to the COVID situation. It does stagger the penalty, but having said that, it's hopeful that with the 2%, everyone is still encouraged to pay on or before July 2nd of 2020.
Thanks, Ken. Can I ask someone to move this, please?
I'll move this.
Lisa moved.
Seconded.
Thank you, Rob. Seconding. And Carolina has her hand up.
Thank you. I was wondering, could we, on item B, could we push, instead of having that not paid by September 2nd, could we also push for either October, like the other classes, or for December maybe? Would that be possible with an amendment?
Well, that's what we're discussing today, is what is possible. Remember, we are not exactly rich. And so, and we also don't have a commercial population base that is affecting our taxes. So the idea of a 2 and 8 is actually quite common amongst a bunch of municipalities. They staggered. I believe Lions Bay is planning the same thing. And I got the idea for a 2 and 8 from maybe West Vancouver. The idea was just to try to ease the burden, but we are fortunately fairly protected. But yeah, this is up for discussion now about what we want to do.
Okay.
Lisa, your hand's up next.
Thank you. I was just wondering, with respect to the unpaid property taxes, does that also roll in the utilities like ward, et cetera, those other alternate, because when someone defers their taxes, they still have to pay the utility portion of it. And I was wondering if that's rolled all in together, or are they separated?
Ken, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the entirety of the village's tax bill is what's being impacted by what we're discussing right now.
That is correct.
Thank you.
No problem. Bruce, your hand's up.
Yes, thank you. Ken, just to clarify, this is our decision. Is the 10% total our decision as well?
The 10%, under an alternative tax scheme, you can't exceed in total the 10%.
No, I wasn't planning to go up.
All right. But yeah, you could reduce the penalty from the 10%, as long as it wasn't over the 10%.
And just to clarify on Lisa's comments, if for the sake of argument, we say it's, I've got a $10,000 total tax notice from the village, just to be clear, if I pay $8,000 of that, I'm going to pay interest on the remaining $2,000. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. So do we have a way, and look, I appreciate it's difficult. We're fortunate in a way not to have the kind of commercial activities that have been so devastated by this COVID situation. So in one way, I think we are fortunate, and we're also fortunate that for a number of residents that they're able to defer through the provincial government. Unfortunately, that wasn't expanded. I was rather hoping it would be more, the province would be willing to remove that age restriction this year, but they haven't been that supportive of municipalities. Can you tell me that, and just clarify for me where we don't get payment. I'm just curious as to the cost to us of non-payment. And maybe this is a question for Lorna, but either of you could answer.
All right, if we dip it,
Ballpark terms. Sorry?
we've been in the provincial legislation allows us to dip into reserves to
Yes.
cover where we're not paid, and deferrals do not count as not paid. We do
No, I
automatically receive all deferrals.
So I guess that comes to my question then, Neil. I mean, first I want to observe, because Lorna's explained to me that of course we're because we have to pay other people, and because we crudely only collect about a third of what comes in on the tax notice. Like if you're paying the village $3,000 or $4,000, you're going to get a bill for about 12. We pass on that other money to other organizations. Is that not correct, Lorna?
That is correct, Your Worship. And the province has made allowances this year that we do not have to pay the school district portion until December, I believe.
Okay.
For
That's a big
BC
one.
assessment and the other TransLink and the other payments that we owe, they will be due as scheduled. There was no softening of those dates.
Okay, so the school one is a big one, though, is it not? As I recall, I think it's a fairly hefty portion of the taxes that we pay. In any event, my point was, if 10%, for the sake of argument, of our residents don't pay on time, that would mean and we paid those other bills, we would have a 30% hit against the money we had left ourselves, because we have to pay out 2/3 of that. Now you're saying a large portion of that, i.e. the school portion, is not going to be charged till the end of the calendar year.
Correct.
Correct. So just the first point I wanted to make is it's not as simple as saying if we only miss 10%, it only hits 10% of our budget. It will be substantially more than that, even with the school costs taken off. And Neil, since you commented on it, maybe you or Ken could comment on our situation as to what we have in the way of reserves if we saw a significant hit in terms of the revenue we collect.
We have the reserves to cover the delay until September, October, but these reserves aren't our money. They are borrowed money that we're paying interest on, and they are not available for anything else as well if we have to cover.
Right, and then and I guess that was my final question. The cost to us, what interest are we paying on them?
Ken, is it 2.9%?
The cost of the interest on, what was it?
Well, we're borrowing money. So our cost of borrowing is 2.9%, I believe. Is that correct?
Well, that's what our long-term borrowing rate is at. Yeah.
Okay. So my point, Ken, is simply that if we had to borrow because residents couldn't pay their taxes, it would cost us 3% per annum to borrow that money.
That would be a solid estimate, I believe.
Look, I appreciate this is back of the envelope sort of thing. My only point is I don't think we should be seeking to get more back than what it's costing us to do this. So I guess I'm questioning why it's 2 and 8. Now I appreciate there's an issue of motivation. I appreciate the 2%. We don't want to encourage people not to pay. And I know, but some people I'm guessing, are just not going to be able to do so. And I wouldn't want to be penalizing them beyond our cost of finding a source of money beyond that. I'll stop there. Thank you, Neil.
No worries. Just of note, my understanding from other mayors is the portion of the population that is typically having the greatest amount of trouble paying the property tax, I think, are condo and apartment style. They're highly leveraged first property, and they're impacted by work.
Okay.
Also not exactly the typical resident made up of Belcarra as well, just on the risk side.
Yeah, especially the condos. Yeah.
Not many condos here, correct?
Not yet.
Rob, you got your hand up?
Yes, I do. I'd just like to know if we have any exposure with TransLink's a release that they are going to defer the 2020 Major Road Network Operations Maintenance Rehabilitation Program funding to municipalities. Do we have any exposure that we're going to get hit with in that regard?
No, they are not deferring the MRN. They're deferring the OMR, which is not what we rely on. So the MRN is not intended to be impacted still at this point.
Okay, their release specifically says 2020 major road network operations, maintenance, and
I know,
rehabilitation programs.
Yeah, I clarified after their release, and it took them about a day and a half to come back, and they clarified that the MRN will not be impacted.
Okay, so we'll get our grant.
Yeah, I was quite concerned about that, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
No other hands up. So we have 2 and 8 that we're going to do a vote. Oh wait, Deborah Struck. Last minute, long-time listener, first-time caller. Deborah, you're unmuted. Please go ahead.
My question is, so in a typical year, how many residents defer their taxes? So we actually don't see those taxes because they've deferred them.
We see them. We get paid instantly. 52 residences deferred their taxes 2 years ago. Last year, 59 residents deferred. But we see the income from that immediately. The province does not delay that.
Okay.
I have a comment as well.
Sure, Peter, go ahead.
So if somebody pays 1 day late at 2% interest, that actually is around 730% interest annualized per year, which is much worse than a credit card company. Yeah. And I've always been amazed that the municipalities are able to get away with charging an interest rate higher than the criminal rate of interest, which is 60% annualized. So we might want to try and contemplate leading other municipalities and do something like decimal 1% daily, which is the same as about 36.5% annualized, and that would be much more humane. And I agree with Bruce that the entire penalty and interest rate system is heavily slanted, anti against the citizens who are weak, and the only reason that the governments do it is because they can get away with it. But industry standards and banks can't get away with doing anything like that.
Noted. Thanks, Peter. The crux of the challenge here is that if we don't charge a penalty, no one has any incentive. In fact, there's a disincentive to pay our property taxes because they can take that $5,000 or $10,000 and they can invest it even in a short term and actually earn a return until the delay date that we choose to accept. So I don't believe any municipality has gone to a 0% penalty, to my knowledge, and because there is concern that people will take advantage of it. And remember, the balance that we have with Belcarra, which makes it difficult, is understanding how many people actually are impacted because our different population base from so many other municipalities. I see no other hands up. Nothing else from the gallery? Are we ready? So shall we vote on the 2 and 8? All right. Bruce, are you trying to put your hand up? I can't tell.
Yeah, sorry, I am. It's
Bruce, you become the new Carolina. You have to put your hand up, right? Because if I'm not looking at the screen at the right time, then I can't tell. So hit the participant button at the bottom. I got you now.
Okay, and I didn't. I'm sorry. I thought I had clicked that button. My apologies.
No worries. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm okay. I take your point, and I think it's a valid one that we not set rates so low that any individual acting purely rationally for their own interest would not pay and invest. So we're talking a few months. As Peter says, even the initial 2% is a fairly hefty portion, given that we impose it in 1 day, but we're not going to impose anything for the balance of the days. I take his point around 0.1%, but I think our staff are busy enough without having to calculate that impact on individual property owners who may pay 3 days later or 12 days later. So I guess I'm wondering why I think we should make a gesture that really shows we're not trying to make any money on this. I agree, Neil, with your point that you don't want to disincentivize payment. Could I suggest something like 2 and 3 as opposed to 2 and 8? Because the reality is that's a fairly hefty hit for somebody over just a few months. And I don't know, you can comment, Neil, or anyone else who knows. Can you get a 5% return in the space of 4 months?
not from a typical lending institution with the current interest rates.
Yeah.
We're doing what we're supposed to be doing, which is discussing what we think the penalty should be.
Exactly.
I'm not aware of anybody who hasn't had it meet the standard 10
Yeah.
after the penalty period has been proposed. But again, we can choose to do whatever we like.
Yeah,
We're not playing with a lot of money. We're not like Burnaby that's got $3 billion in the bank.
Yeah.
We should just be mindful of our responsibilities to be able to manage our own reserves as well. That's all.
I appreciate that, but I just want to be very sensitive to those. Like, I'm going to assume we will not get people failing to pay other than because they simply can't at this point. So
it's worth putting. I did put a note out to everybody on council and staff that if anybody was notified of anybody who lost their job or was negatively impacted by the COVID economic crisis, to please at least let's try to capture that information so we have more info.
Yes.
And not a single entity has been identified.
Yeah, but then, you know,
Just for perspective.
people's financial position is rather like their sexual orientation. They're not going to talk about it unless it's absolutely essential. So I wouldn't take the non-response to be indicative of the situation people are in. I think the vast majority of people are going to pay, and I certainly support having that kind of modest penalty. But in any event, I'm just saying I'll not be voting in favor of the 2 and 8, and then I will propose 2 and 3.
Okay, I'm going to go with council next. Carolina's got her hand up.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you, Bruce, for your comments. I think I agree with you. I was also looking into dropping this 8 to a 5 or possibly a 3. I would feel better about a 3. I do know of quite a few people that have been affected in the village here in Anmore. I will not speak who they are because I don't think it's appropriate. I think, like Bruce said, it's a private matter. I shouldn't be speaking about other people's financial situation, but I do know quite a few people here in Anmore, and yes, they have been affected in one way or another. So I will go with Bruce's suggestion to down that number 8 to 3 on item B. Thank you.
Deborah.
Your worship, sorry to interrupt. It's Lorna. Just before you do call the vote, we should have clarification if this is for first, second, and third reading or for first, second, third, and adoption.
Thanks, Lorna. So 2 things. We will I think we're just going to go standard, just the first 3. The sentiment's not the same as it was at the last council meeting, so we'll just do the first 3 and we won't move for adoption on anything unless someone decides they want to push that. And the second thing is we have not yet had a motion for amendment, and so we're just still continuing the conversation around whether or not Bruce would like to make a formal amendment for the 2 and 3. So we have 2 other people have their hands up. Ken, you've got your hand up. Do you want to add some more info before we go to the next question?
Yes, I would just caution council that by implementing something that's a 2 and 3 as opposed to the norm of 10, you run the risk of people saying that, you know, that with that penalty, they'll just defer paying past the second due date. And so you could have precipitate a further cash flow issue beyond the September due date. So I would caution council on that. I think that you're going to see more and more people applying for tax deferral this year as well, which will, of course, make things easier. And the same penalties apply for the homeowner grant. So if the homeowner grant is submitted late, under the general tax music scheme, they used to get a 10% penalty on July 3rd. Now with this scheme, they'll have only a 2% on July 3rd and a 8% if they don't submit the homeowner grant by September the 2nd.
So sorry.
You want a clarification? Go ahead, Bruce.
Thank you. Yeah, Ken, sorry, the 2 and 8 would, if we change to 2 and 3, does the homeowner grant change, or is that provincially set?
No, that would be the same penalties as we instigate.
Okay, and are you suggesting that 5% over the space of 3 months, in fact, would be an incentive for some? I'm sorry, I don't know what people pay on deferral. Is it around the 2.5% range or something? To the province?
The province has a very low interest rate.
Yeah.
I think it's 1 point something.
So it's even, so even at 2 and 3, that wouldn't incentivize a purely rational, self-interested party to fail to defer or to delay payment.
Yeah, theoretically speaking.
No, I understand that that it's not just pure mechanics. Obviously, there's a dimension. I just feel collecting 5% from people whom I'm assuming want to pay and would pay if they could just seems to be more than enough of a penalty and more than enough of an incentive, in my opinion. But look, I'd like to hear from others as well.
We've got Peter and Deb. Oh, hang on a second. You're muted. I will take care of that. Sorry. Go ahead, please.
It's Peter. So I had never suggested having 0% interest rate, but you have to be careful when you talk about interest rate, whether you talk about annualized or non-annualized. So if it's 2%, and how many extra months would you have to pay at that 2% first penalty?
Till December.
We're looking at 3 months right now.
So 3, so you have to multiply that by 4 to get the annualized rate. So you really compare apples to apples, because annualized is multiplied by the inverse of the percentage of the year that you're collecting it on. So if you're collecting on a quarter of a year, then the interest rate is really four times higher than you're talking about. And when the province lends it to you to defer, whatever their rate is, I think Ken said it was 1 point something or other, that's annualized for an entire year.
Yeah.
So what I'm talking about is that when you calculate what the annualized rate is on some of these things, they're I believe, highly excessive. When interest rates were very high during the last 30 years, these penalties were 10% then. Now we're into a climate of ultra low interest rates, and the penalties have not come down to keep in line with that. So really, in comparison to bank charges, the interest rates and these penalties have gone up dramatically. So I just would like you to, contemplate being kinder to the citizens who are having a tough time paying and not charging an annualized rate, which is draconian or excessive.
All right, thank you. Ken, you've got your hand up.
Yes, so the other thing I think you have to remember is that municipalities and local governments only collect the revenue halfway through their fiscal year, the majority of it, the municipal property taxes. So we've had to incur operating expenditures from January to June before we collect the majority of our revenues. And as Lorna was saying, if we don't collect the revenues that are related to Metro Vancouver, TransLink, BCAA, all those payments need to be made in August. And so I'm just concerned that we may get people saying, we don't mind a 5% penalty, and I'm not even going to pay by September the 2nd.
I, of course, obviously share Ken's concern, which is why I was proposing the 8% as, being also consistent with other municipalities. Carolina, you've got your hand up again.
Thank you. Just for clarity, so the school tax, we only need to pay them in December. So couldn't we use, if that's the case, if a lot of people, let's say, don't pay on time, couldn't we use the school tax money to cover whatever we have to cover in the meantime? Thank you.
Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, that would help, I think, to use some of that. If the question becomes too, if people don't pay by September the 2nd, are they going to let more of the taxes go into arrears and incur arrears interest into 2021, and thereby just compound the problem as well?
Carolina?
Okay, no, I'm good. Thank you. Thank you. My bad.
Okay, Bruce, if you'd like to change the motion, this is the time.
Yes, thank you. So I'd like to propose First, I'd just like to clarify, we said it was a 3-month delay from the first failure to pay on July 2nd. I think it's only 2 if we stay with September. If we move to October, it would be a 3-month delay for the second penalty. So what I'd like to propose is maintain July 2nd and September 2nd, but reduce the percentage or keep the percentage at 2% on July 2nd, but make it a 3% penalty on September 2nd. I take Ken's points. I'm hopeful that we don't see a significant impact. My guess is we'll see a big jump in the number of deferrals in the village in all likelihood, and hopefully that will put us in a good position. But I understand Ken's point, and I understand yours, Neil. We're taking a chance on people's goodwill, and I believe 5% is more than enough to encourage any of those who are doing calculations on interest if they can afford to make the payment. And our cost is 3%, right? So if we're collecting 5, we're fine until, as Ken points out, this delays into the next year substantially.
Correct. I'll just make one little addition. If we have to borrow more money, it doesn't necessarily come in at a long-term borrowing rate because we don't have much in the realm of reserves if we're covering long-term no payments.
Understood.
But, can I get a seconder for Bruce's motion?
I'll second it. Carolina, second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And opposed?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. So for 2 and 3%, any more discussion? Lorna, you've got the correct wording for the 2 and 3. You've got the captured?
Yes, I do. Thank you.
Great. So to September, and then let's get a vote on the amended motion, please. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, so Rob is opposed. Motion carries.
Thank you.
And we'll move on. All right, reports from mayor and council committee representatives. I don't have a report. Anyone from council like anything to report on?
Right.
Bruce, are you buying yourself time? There you go. Go ahead.
I'm trying to find the hands up button down here in the corner of my screen.
Okay, go ahead.
But I think I've worked it out. Yeah, Lorna, do you have the resolution I proposed? Do we have that we can put up on the screen?
Paula, can you put it up on the screen, or do you want mine? Just put this in paper. Yeah, just give Paula 1 minute.
Okay. Well, if I can begin to speak to it. Just waiting for Paula to get it up. As we have, and we're undoubtedly going to get to, we've had a fair amount of in the way of correspondence for this meeting, and much of it does have to do with issues around our water supply and work that the water committee has done producing their draft report. I've talked to a number of members of the committee, and I haven't personally formed an opinion yet with respect to the desirability of a new water tank. But I would very much like to hear more from that committee and encourage them to do further work around the options that we face as a community. A number of the questions we've had have to do with the degree of thoroughness of our process and the information we have. The committee certainly pointed out that with the existing water tank, there was a dearth of documentation that they were seeking. And I think, as I've said before, I was personally surprised to learn about some limitations on our tank that I would have confidently told you previously didn't exist, which was the issue of the maximum fill on that tank. But having said that, what I am proposing, if we can find my reference, is that we ask the water committee to do further work, and as the workload that I appreciate currently is very high with our staff, once we get past that, so issues of taxation and issues of COVID-related activities, including the complexity of our tax process that we just discussed, that we support that committee in doing Zoom-related calls where everyone in the village who is interested, as we're seeing tonight, we've got a lot of participants, that they could do meetings and present following the gathering of information, provide recommendations to us as to how they feel we can best address our water situation. I can read the resolution if that's more helpful. Lauren, I don't see anything on the screen yet.
Yeah, she's having trouble getting it on the screen. So if you don't mind, Bruce, thanks.
Okay, so I'm going to read this. It's your standard long-winded resolution. Whereas the Village Committee on Water System Capacity for Fire Protection has highly relevant expertise, but has reported difficulty in securing some information it considers relevant, and whereas further public meetings of that committee could assist both council and interested residents to understand in detail the issues and options related to our water system and fire protection, be it resolved that, one, council requests that the committee continue its work with village support, open brackets, once the current village workload associated with COVID-19 and taxes eases, close brackets. Two, secure any information or documentation it considers relevant. And secondly, utilize technology such as Zoom to allow open public participation in its meetings. I can repeat that if anybody
With
wants.
the handful.
I know it is, yes.
So Paul, have you actually got a copy of that anyways?
I do.
You do? Okay.
Yeah, my apologies. I'd sent it in earlier, but I thought it would have been a part of the package, and I understand it's not easy to pull these things up quickly.
So Bruce, you are aware, as we discussed this, that we have a water engineering firm who is being backed by Metro Vancouver's water engineers currently working on this. So how would you propose they work with the water committee?
No, I wouldn't propose we change anything that we're doing now, Neil. It's my opinion that given the virtual crisis that we're in nationally, that most of these things are not going to move. I mean, ultimately, my expectation is, let's assume the initial estimates are accurate. Ultimately, with respect to the tank, we would face a choice as to whether we wanted to invest just over $1 million, let's say, assuming all the estimates are accurate, because we got 3/4 of what we needed from another source, or that we don't get anything from another source and we'd have to invest, let us say, 3.8 million ourselves in the tank. So that's a decision we're ultimately going to have to make. I wouldn't propose we interrupt anything else that we've got going on. I would expect the committee, I would leave it to them because I really do respect their expertise and background in this area. But I would expect they may well want to speak to our engineer, but ultimately what they would do is just make recommendations to council. I do think, though, that the discussion and the details into which they will go and the expertise they have would help any citizens who have questions about this. And I'm among them. I would plan to sit in on all their meetings.
Okay, fair enough. We have Chris on our line as well, and I'm sure Chris, who represents our engineering firm, would
Yep.
be able to work with the water committee, of course, as well. Chris, if you have any comments, I'm just going to unmute you.
Could we have a seconder for the motion, Your Worship, please?
I think.
I'll second his motion.
Okay, Carolina seconded. Chris, you're not muted. Do you have any anything you'd like to include in the recommendation of the motion, just so it works well with your existing processes?
So I've kind of read through the correspondence today, and one particular Martin's correspondence, we raised some questions about further exploration of options. I don't disagree with that. However, I think everyone needs to understand that the reason that we've pushed forward to some degree with the application for reservoir was because there was a federal grant opening and it closed a couple of months ago. That we kind of pushed it through to some degree, you might want to say, because we want to try and take advantage of that application process to save the village roughly 75% of each dollar. So that's one of the reasons why we've kind of proceeded on the basis of a new reservoir. Now, as I've said a number of times, it's important to understand that even if you do get the application and you're successful, it doesn't mean you actually have to use the grant funding either. So there's still many options open to you, but the village has proceeded to make sure you have as many options as possible open to yourselves. So I think that's one thing that people should understand here, that there's more to do for sure. You're at the very prelim stage of designing something, and there's always goalposts move and what have you. So it's important to understand that as well.
Thanks, Chris. So it sounds like, Chris, as we continue to go through the entire planning process, you've not identified any concerns that you'd like to have built into the motion as proposed by Bruce for how to work with the water committee. You're comfortable with everything?
Yeah, yeah, I don't mind working with the water committee. Obviously, it's an open process. I've got no problem with the design process and talking to people why we do things and whatnot. That's perfectly fine. You know, if that's how you guys want to work, that's okay with me.
All right, Bruce, do you have your hand up for another comment?
Yes, thank you, Neil. Yeah, just to say, yeah, thank you, Chris. And I have no objection whatsoever to the steps we've taken thus far. I'm very, very familiar with federal grant processes, and I appreciate timeliness is extremely important. And as I said earlier, we could face quite a different decision if it's, you know, if we can secure a substantial new tank and we've got a pretty good handle on the cost, and it's only costing us 1/4 of the price it would otherwise cost. That's a different decision for council to make than if you're facing the full cost. So thank you.
All right, so let's vote on Bruce's motion. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed?
I
Rob, you're opposed. Okay, noted. Motion passed.
I did have, by the way, my hand up. You must
No.
have missed it.
Oh, not when I called the question. I apologize, or at least I didn't see it. Do you want to? We've already voted, but would you like to have a retrospective comment?
No, that's fine. My point here is that very simply that we're in a budget process. We're doing nothing else at this point. And I mean, quite frankly, this water tower and other things have been kicked around to the point that I feel like, why don't we just kick the can down the road and not deal with it, as it hasn't been dealt with since 2010. Do we have any appetite in the village to do that? Or is that a shocker for everyone? My only comment.
Bruce, your hand's up.
Yeah, just first, I would hope you're supportive, Rob, because I think you're the representative to the committee. So if I do think, my impression from chatting to a number of members of the committee is that they have a great deal of interest in this and the options we face to reduce risks in the village. I'll talk later about some other initiatives that I think we should move on to help reduce risk, because I fully appreciate none of us want to see anybody's life endangered. So I think you would find the committee, I mean, if they came to a conclusion that, you know, there were 5 other things we should do, well, I would certainly listen to that. But there's a solid case, I believe, for the tank. I just say I'm not yet convinced, but I'd like to have a chance to listen to people wade through those options in more detail.
I would simply
hang on, Rob. Rob, just let's just keep this together here. Chris, you've got your hand up. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to clarify for some people as well in this process. I think a number of reports have come out, and I've reviewed it as well. Your existing reservoir is below the capacity you'd like it to be at for firefighting, for domestic fire flows as well. So I think the question always comes down to, it's a level of risk. It's not for me as the engineer to tell you guys you must do something. I can inform you of where your levels are at and what the risks are for you guys. And then it's up for you guys to kind of come back and say, is this something you want to invest in or not? It's not for me as the engineer to tell you, you shall build a reservoir. So I think that's the other thing of working with the water committee. I can give information and professional opinions, but at the end of the day, it'll be up for council to, in my opinion, to make that decision on if you want to build a reservoir or not.
Thanks, Chris. I'll add some background for the new people who are here. In the meeting with Metro Vancouver's engineering team and discussing the options that we have, including all the maps and the charts of where the water lines are for Metro Vancouver and otherwise. There's no question that everybody around the table with Metro Van and Belcarra recognize that it'd be best if we could hook up to Metro Vancouver. There's no way on earth we could ever afford. We'd have to sell too many road ends to make it even something that I think anyone in the village would consider. And so that was moved off the table because it would be in the tens of millions of dollars. It's what we should have if we were to do things right. It's not an option. So then Metro Vancouver moved back to, okay, what's the least expensive option considering Belcarra is net negative? Well over $2 million in pure debt, net debt. And it was cheaper to look at a water reservoir than it was to look at the North Van with the comfort that our controlling our own water input would have over North Van's limited commitment in the event of firefighting requirements. So Metro Vancouver also supported not only the recommendation of the water, the water reservoir early on, but then they had their engineering team, recognizing that we needed help, support us by analyzing the RFP for our water engineering service, who ended up being Chris, who you see included on this call. So it was Metro Vancouver's selection of Chris and his firm from their own engineers to help us make this selection as well. So we tried to have this be a process that was recommended by experts every step of the way, including the selection of Chris. Rob, your hand's up?
Yes, it is. You know, my concern on this is we're going to run into another 502, and this thing is going to be prolonged. It's going to go down the road. We've got experts that are working on the problem as we speak in a budget process. And that's simply my concern on this. We'll see. I guess time will tell where it goes, and that's why I'm opposed. And I also believe that we should be following the advice of the people that actually have the expertise, specifically that are working on the problem at this point.
No,
But
Carolina,
I'm up to support whatever council, wherever they'd like to go with it.
Okay, Carolina's got her hand up. Go ahead, Carolina.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to Bruce's comments. The one solution that we looked into, like, you know, two solutions, which is hooking into Coquitlam, Metro Van, I mean, or doing the tank. But the committee did raise other ways to get this done. I guess we got to keep in mind here that our main problem here, we want to be able to fight fires for long. And perhaps doing any changes to our flow, it's not the only solution. So again, I'm supportive of Bruce's motion, and I would leave it up to the experts, because in the end, we do have two engineers sitting on the committee, on the water committee, and we have a person that is part of the Saskatchewan Fire Department as well. So I would say let's listen to the experts, all of them, and let them do their thing. You know, let them do their thing. So thank you. That's all for me.
All right, so that's done. We voted, correct?
That's correct, Your Worship.
Rob, you had your note there. We have someone from the gallery. Alex from the gallery. Would you like to make a comment?
Hey there. Yeah, so I just wanted to see, based on what comes of the recommendations from the water consultant that you have, is the village going to go to a formal RFI and then a formal RFP and mimic good best practices from a procurement standpoint across other government organizations?
Of course. That was it. You went back on mute by yourself. That was like the quickest question and answer from the gallery of all time. Nothing else, so let's move on to correspondence and proclamations. Can I get someone to move receipt of the items, please?
I'll move. Carolina moves.
Carolina moves.
Second.
Bruce seconds, thank you. We do have an action item in 8.1.
Could you vote just on receipt, Your Worship?
All right, let's vote on receipts. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank
None
you.
opposed? Motion carried, no problem. And so does that mean we just move receipt on all 16? Do we need to move receipt on the individual on after then, 8.1, Lorna?
No, you've just voted receipt on all of them, and now you may go to vote on the action item and
Okay.
separately.
All right.
Mhm.
So the action item for the National Missing Children's Month and Missing Children's Day. Can I get someone to move the item, please?
I'll move.
Second.
Lisa
Carolina second.
moved, Carolina seconded. Any comments? All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
None opposed, motion carried. And then we have a ton of information items, and I know we've got a lot of interest in these. So what I'd like to propose is we actually go through each one. You get a chance to have a Q&A on each one. So we've got the time. Let's do it right and make sure everybody gets a chance to have their questions and answers, including in the gallery on each of these different. So 8.2 is our first one from the Board of Trustees. Are there any comments or questions from the Board of Trustees minutes from the Saskatchewan Volunteer Fire Department? Carolina, go ahead.
Right, sorry. I just gotta find my paper here. On the trustees, on the fire trustees meeting, there was, sorry, I can't find it right now. Which one is the item, Neil?
8.1?
Sorry?
No, sorry,
8.2.
8.2, okay, sorry. So on the last part here, under other businesses, it says Belcarra still requires a large water reservoir. Current reservoir is not sufficient to provide optimal fire protection. It is a top priority of the village to get a large reservoir funded and built ASAP. I would like to know if all the trustees were in agreement and where did this statement came from. Thank you.
This is other business. Lisa did not attend the meeting, so she was not able to provide any feedback. And this was just other business where we talked. There's no voting, there's no acceptance. But I will note the fire department is one of our, if not the strongest proponent for additional water requirements to be able to protect Belcarra. So I was updating the fire department when I brought this up as business, responding to their desire for us to augment our water system.
So it came from you?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this letter? Nothing for 8.2 then. Let's go to 8.3. 8.3 is Shaw Communications. Probably not the most contentious letter on this agenda. Any comments on the Shaw? Nothing on Shaw, so we're going to move that one. 8.4 from the Mayor of Langley regarding budget mitigation measures. Any questions, comments? Nothing. Moving up to 8.5 for School District 43 for the COVID pandemic school response. Any questions or comments? None. 8.6 for the Village of Hazelton for the UBCM resolution regarding the BC Gaming Grant. Any comments or questions? No one's jumping at this to try to have a municipality under 10,000 residents wanting to have access to a grant? Really? This is a good one, guys and gals. No comment. The silence is deafening. Free money sitting out there. No one's asking for it.
Yeah, I'm for it. Why not?
Okay, would we like to make a motion to support the Village of Hazelton's request to UBCM?
Yeah, I'll move the motion.
I'm leading the witness here. Is there a seconder? Bruce is holding up the peace sign. Couldn't hear you, but yes, peace on earth. Yes, Bruce, thank you.
I was thinking more of V for victory, but that's fine. Both will work.
All right. Lorna, would you require anything other than this, if we approve this, just to write a support letter for Hazelton to the UBCM?
That's perfectly fine, Your Worship.
Thank you. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, none opposed, motion carried. Thank you very much. Good choice, guys.
Can I ask Neil, just as with, or maybe Lorna, how is the UBCM? Is it still planned to actually meet? Is it going to be a massive Zoom conference call? Or?
Actually, that's the one conference I don't think we've heard from yet. Most of the other ones have been canceled, so
yes.
we'll keep you in the loop.
I would not expect a whole lot out of this, as it's a questionable effective conference and motion in the first place, but to support it can't hurt.
I agree, fully.
All right. 8.7 for Jonathan Cote regarding support of federal funding assistance for public transit. Comments or questions? Anybody want to support this? Bueller. Bueller. All right, we're not supporting public transit. 8.8, Ralph Drew regarding budgeting for the fire hall replacement. Any questions or comments? Alex Bryce, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I think after reading through some of the letters on the latest report, this is really what got me engaged in the whole process. I became aware that we were looking to sell a number of our road ends to improve our firefighting capabilities, and I don't want to put down the the urgent need to make sure that we've got a safe firefighting capability. But my family and many of my neighbors really enjoy the road ends, and specifically the access to the ocean that it gives us. Arguably, it's probably the worst time possible to start selling the road ends given the current state of the economy. And when I was running through the numbers, I mean, it is what it is, but when I was running through the numbers and I was looking at the preliminary estimates of what it would cost to replace the fire hall and for the water tank, I was really shocked by how high those numbers were. What was the basis of estimate that you folks used to try and come up with those preliminary budgeting numbers? Because I think that has obviously a big impact on the disposition of our assets.
So on the water reservoir, the grant application allowed us to build as much into it value-wise as possible. So we applied for what all the contingencies could look like for the water reservoir to ensure the grant application would cover the extent of whatever we might need with regards to water reservoir. On the fire hall, the design team that designed the fire hall for Belcarra, at the request of the trustees and Metro Vancouver, I think probably close to 2 years ago, that design team cost out Belcarra's fire hall at approximately 1.8 million for two different models. The same design team has done 34 or 35 other fire hall designs in Canada, and they're known as the experts, were presented to at least the trustees as the experts. Coincidentally, they had just done a fire hall for another municipality and had fully costed it out at $3.4 million. When that municipality a few months back, about 6 months back, went out to the market, the two RFP responses for that fire hall came back at 7.7 and $8 million, I believe. In other words, the design team was a full half the actual cost of what it could be to pay for a new fire hall. So when you see the potential of 4 million in the fire hall, just like the water reservoir, we are in very early planning stages. There is no commitment, but we are looking at trying to build plans for the worst case scenario. So that's all. There's no commitment to do road ends at this point. We're just investigating it still. The plan is being built, and we don't know how many road ends would be necessary or which road ends might be picked. But I do think it's worth noting. You talk about it being a bad time to sell road ends. If we are required to augment our water reservoir, a parcel tax is an awful lot harder on residents than the sale of a road end. And that's why we look at road ends as what we're investigating right now, so that we have as much information as possible in advance of having to issue a painful parcel tax to pay for a water reservoir, if not a fire hall.
If I could just follow up on that comment, and
yeah, of course.
I'm not 100% sure if this information is accurate or not, but if I understand it correctly, the initial budgetary municipality that you're talking about was the Bowen Island district. And so, I'm in the construction space and I'm actually very familiar with that project. That was a very large fire hall, 3 bays, multiple training rooms. The emergency response would be built in through the fire hall for the police as well, along with a number of offices and shared offices in that space. I certainly can't imagine that we'd be looking at something like that in our municipality. It seems a little bit excessive. Is that not correct?
Yeah, so what you're missing is that ours was about 1.8 because we don't require what they're looking to build. The costing expertise is what we're looking at as a linear sample. So the costing that they made that didn't represent fair market for the other fire hall is the same people costing the Belcarra hall options.
But granted, I mean, when I looked through the construction drawings, it seemed pretty elaborate. I think there was long cedar trusses and all kinds of fanciful things that were put into that fire hall. And again, given the current crisis in terms of getting construction work done prior to the COVID scenario that we found ourselves in, I can certainly understand why it'd be very expensive to build something as remote out as Bowen Island and to get contractors to go in and bid on that at a cost-effective process. I just want to make 100% sure that we're doing our very, very best to mitigate potential tax increases and to mitigate the sale of our assets, particularly these challenging times. Because again, I mean, these road ends are precious to many members of our community. I've got photos all across my office wall of sitting there literally playing at the end of one of these road ends at the beach. So, I want to make sure that as a community, we're doing our very best to maintain our assets in these challenging times.
Well put. And believe me, if we didn't have to figure out a way to, if we weren't broke, if we didn't have approximately $1 million of borrowing capacity, we would be using our own reserves. If the fire department had done some infrastructure planning 25 years ago, like we did with our fire trucks, and put money aside, which we haven't, not a penny has ever been put aside for fire trucks, for the fire halls. If we had money to pay for it some other way, it wouldn't be either a parcel tax or a road end. Now, remember, we are nowhere near okaying those design drawings, period. We're nowhere near it. We're in the planning stage, and you'll notice in the budget, it's for 2022, and our tax planning and our budget does not have any impact at all towards the 2022 fire hall placement if we take a look at trying to raise some money to offset what could be a parcel tax or otherwise from Belcarra. So we are a long, long way to go. We're just trying to begin the planning for the first time ever on replacement of a fire hall.
Yeah, and I want to make sure that that I make this comment. Is I was happy to hear that you're going to go through an RFI and subsequently an RFP process for the water reservoir. I think that there are a ton of options. I appreciate Bruce's candor in terms of looking to defer and have more village input on this. I mean, there's a lot of ways to fight fires. From what I understand, there's different options out there that we should be definitely evaluating. Obviously, we want to manage the finances of the village to the most conservative level we possibly can, and I do appreciate that openness. And I would assume, of course, that we would extend that same logic to the construction of a potential new fire hall and the financing then of it.
Absolutely. We've been 100% transparent every step of the way, and we'll continue it, including the proper processes. Correct. So I'm going to move on, and Bruce, you were next. Deborah, I know you're ahead, but I'd like to give council the first chance in advance of gallery. So please, Bruce.
Yeah, just responding to the cost issue, and yes, just to reiterate, the review of the halls and a report on that was something that was initiated prior to the last election. This is not a rushed process, but I wanted to also add that the costing estimate's a little complex because the manner in which the costs for the total fire department are shared between Anmore and Belcarra means that we may well end up paying a portion of the total cost of the requirements in both Anmore and Belcarra, because it is a single entity, and it really relates to Ralph's letter, which kicked off this conversation. So when we try to put an estimate on what our cost will be, there's a range there, and it still is unclear, and it hasn't been narrowed down, and obviously that has to happen.
Thanks, Bruce. I'll add just a little bit more to the background as you brought it back to Ralph's letter, which is great. The old way that the contributions to the fire hall were done, well, they were never done, but the old way for the fire trucks was through the trustees agreement. Metro Vancouver instituted the guidance of the trustees. That will continue. However, because we've not saved any money, Belcarra is going to end up having to pay for this fire hall somehow. And if it's a 3-year amortization or a 5-year amortization, don't forget that we can't borrow enough to pay for the fire hall. Can't be done. And so either Metro Vancouver can accelerate what could be a short stage, let's say 3 to 4 or 5 year maybe parcel tax, or again, if we have some money in Belcarra with reserves, which is the only thing the plan is intended to do, is give us an option in several years as to whether or not we could avoid having a parcel tax or a significant surprise tax coming through Metro Vancouver based on the old agreement. But Metro Vancouver has recommended that we throw out the old agreement and build an entirely new one from scratch with Anmore, which is why we're trying to be prudent in doing some degree of planning in Belcarra for what's going to be a significant expense for us down the road. And by the way, Ralph said that there hasn't been consultation with Chief Sharp. Chief Sharp has presented publicly at multiple meetings. I've probably spoken to him about this somewhere between 30 and 40 times. It is unbelievable how much communication every step of the way there has been from the fire department. And this is it's misleading to say the very least that the fire department is not only driving this, but up to speed every step of the way of what we're working on. I don't see any more hands. Are there any other hands? Any comments on Ralph's letter? All right, let's go to 8.9. Vernon Barrett's letter. I actually kind of address this as I explain what's going on with the traditional versus the potential of what the new operating agreement could look like. Does anybody have any questions about Vernon's letter?
Where's
You buying time,
my-
Lisa?
Sorry, looking for the hand.
All right, Lisa, you got it. Go ahead.
I'm so sorry.
Go ahead, you're on.
Oh, I know it's getting dark in here now. The sun has just gone down. I really appreciate this letter from Verna. I really appreciate everybody's letters and comments and concerns and emails and phone calls and everything that's been going on. I'm a new trustee. I'm naive. I have lots of education to happen. I apologize for not being at the last trustee meeting. I got stuck downtown with that protest and I couldn't get out. And anyway, what I've learned from this letter from Verna is that it doesn't appear that it's the village's responsibility to pay for this this fire hall. It's up to the trustees to bring forward their budget to say what it is going to be. And so I don't even know why we even have it on our plan. So it's
if I didn't explain it well enough before, let me try again.
okay.
Vern is correct. That's how the trustees and the decision making and the budgeting are currently set up. That's how they've always been set up. However, there was never any planning done for the costing of it, for the financing or putting money away for a rainy day for the fire hall. So going forward, we don't have 25 years to put millions of dollars away for the fire hall, as Metro Vancouver's existing agreement has. So there's going to need to be an amendment to the payment structure somehow. Now, on top of that, everything you see from Verna is at the recommendation of Metro Vancouver at risk of becoming obsolete. And we are in negotiations now to put an entirely new payment agreement together. So it's entirely possible the new agreement could continue to have the funding done through Metro Vancouver. But if we have to come up with $4 million, $2 million, $5 million, it's still going to be coming from us. And if we can't afford to borrow that much money because the village is in such significant debt, having an option, which is what we're planning to look at. What we're planning to do is try to find options not to have to do a massive parcel tax to offset the cost of the fire hall. So we're not committing to anything.
Well,
Sorry, just to finish. We're not committing to anything with the plan. What we're trying to do is plan for the contingency that the negotiation with AMOR right now will not be what you see with what Vernon put before, and that things are changing as per recommended with Metro Van.
You know, it's oh, I'm sorry.
No, keep going, Lisa. You're up.
Okay, yeah, sorry. It's just that I understand, you know, from when and the history. Verna's letter is very insightful, actually, and I understand. And as if other people haven't read this, and I know what you're saying, Neil, that there possibly will be changes, but they're not changes yet. Anyways, and we were incorporated after the fire halls were built and funded. So they're a totally different animal than fire halls from other municipalities that were incorporated and then built their fire halls. They're their assets. It's not our asset. So we don't own it. We don't own the land. So
you're right, but we pay for it. We pay for it. It's coming from Belcarra residents. No matter what happens, Belcarra residents are paying for it.
But, you know, in her letter, she clearly says, and this is where I'm, you know, it's a learning, this is a real learning curve for somebody new on council. And she says that a council member or trustee, a council member, also a trustee, wears two hats. So you have to think as a trustee as well as a council member. And it's difficult. She says you can't get those two hats mixed up. So when a council person feels strongly about a particular issue, our duty is to first convince the Board of Trustees, not the residents, not the taxpayers of the village. So until I read this letter, I really didn't have a problem. So, and it goes on to say that the trustees are empowered to prepare the operating budgets, et cetera, and then they approve the budget numbers, which are relayed to the two municipalities, Belcarra and Anmore. So that's still in play today, right? Am I incorrect?
It's being negotiated now. It's still in play, but everything's being renegotiated.
But how long, you know,
let's say it stays the same and
Yeah.
nothing changes.
Yeah.
The trustees will then say, yes, we're going to build this hall for Belcarra and we're going to build this hall for Anmore. And we're going to advise Metro Vancouver of the costs, and Metro Vancouver is going to turn around and bill our villages for them to build them. So what you see, the plan, having the fire hall that we're addressing years down the road with zero commitment is just to try to be fiscally responsible and try to find a way down the road that we think about options other than a massive parcel tax to be able to come through Metro Vancouver on us. Because remember, we can't afford to borrow that kind of money yet. We don't have the borrowing room to pay for our fire hall or part of Anmore's.
Well, right, I understand that. And you keep referring back to a parcel tax. So parcel tax has to be done by referendum. Is that incorrect?
No, it would have to be a parcel tax. Yeah. So yes, we had to go to referendum just to get into the level of debt we're at now. And we'd have to go to referendum to go into any further debt because we're beyond what is the the top tolerance of debt without additional context. So yes, they would have to go to referendum, and the referendum, we'd like to have options is the only reason that you see all this discussion happening. Now remember, this isn't just about a seismic failure. There is hard data out there showing there is serious carcinogen and there are associated deaths for firefighters and their families based on not being able to have properly cleaned or protected gear isolated away from exhaust and creosote and cleaning facilities.
Yeah, we've talked about that.
Our firefighters are going into that every time they come back, and they're in a non-work safe compliant environment. It's not just about seismic, it's about taking care of them. We are going to have to do a fire hall, and unfortunately, we're going to pay for it. The plan is just to discuss how best can we manage that payment for the worst case scenario, which, as I said, we had like 4 million in there.
Right. I understand that. And I'm not saying not in favor of it. I know there's still lots of discussion going on, but this letter has really brought a lot foresight. And I just think that after our last council meeting, I think we were maybe a bit hasty doing the 1, 2, 3 and adopting all at once. Because since that happened, all this correspondence and emails and phone calls and chit chat's been going on. And I'm just wondering if it shouldn't have been included in the financial plan, but maybe just as a footnote. So people are aware of it. It's being discussed at the trustee meetings. It's you know, but it's not, because people see it on there and they're going, holy moly. You know what I'm saying? So,
yeah,
and I know it doesn't affect, I know that it doesn't affect our current tax increases, but I think it's hasty putting it in that financial plan, and I'm thinking it should have just been a subnote. Do you know what I'm saying? A footnote, so it's still recognized, and then when it comes up, it can be moved into the right year.
Well, point taken. I mean, recognize that we had things in our budget last year that we didn't spend the money on, and that was for last year. Never mind 2022. So footnote or not is just is a different way to describe it. But if it's a footnote, then staff is not empowered to plan. If it's in there, staff is empowered to plan, and we can choose not to let them do anything. We make the policies. So the goal is just to be able to have options, and 2022 is a long way away with zero commitments, just to see if we can have an option to whatever that funding, if it does come through Metro Vancouver, whatever its impact is going to be on residents. That's all. Is it okay if I move? We've got a few people in line.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. And I also, my last comment is I think 4,000 or 4 million, I think is quite high.
I hope you're right, but every year it seems like every infrastructure project goes up by 10%. And so it may not be high enough. And depending on how the negotiation goes with Anmore, we haven't actually taken a look at having to pay for part of their hall as well, which will be more expensive.
Okay, so I'm going to mute myself. Thank you very much for listening to me.
No problem. So Rob, you're up next.
Well, I didn't think the hand worked anymore.
Well, I want to make sure people have a chance to discuss. We have done this transparently every step of the way, and I want to make sure we continue.
Absolutely, and I couldn't agree with you more, okay? I have a couple of problems. Number one, with Vera's letter, and I like to look at what has been, and I've sat in on those fire hall meetings. The bottom line of it is, it seems to me there's this huge resistance to the water tower, to the fire hall. Essentially, where the village is at, taking those out of the equation totally, okay? We still need 300 to 350 a year for infrastructure just to keep us where we are. We are 300,000 plus short without deferring anything, without anything going sideways this year to do with COVID, a second infection that might hit us. We've got our water debt that's sitting out there, but throw that out to the side, and we have zero in reserves, literally. So there's $2 million on a rough amount that's sitting there. So what I'd like to propose is, why don't all the people that are opposed to the water tank, the fire hall, budgeting, planning in advance so that we know where we're going to end up, why don't some solutions be presented to our financial problems outside of all of this noise that's taking up all of our time? This is a budgeting process. That's all it is. And it's quite actually frustrating for me to sit here and listen when in actual fact, I look at letters that are partial quotations, okay, without qualifiers. I look at letters of things that were in the past that aren't. The reason it's $4,000 is the present agreement on the fire hall is that Anmar pays 50%, we pay 50% of the total cost of the two halls. They have to have a bigger fire hall than we do. They have to have meeting rooms, etc. So I'm looking for solutions. So let's cut the noise on the tank and on the fire hall for now, and let's discuss what we need on this other side, because the movement seems to be that the problem is selling a road end. So if there's other solutions out there on how we can actually come up with this 2 million, I'm all for it. And we've done some pretty serious planning on our business to do with COVID, have kept all our employees that are still working, and it's because we looked for solutions. So I'd like to see some solutions. What I'm hearing is a lot of resistance and no solutions. So that's really all I have to say at this point in time.
Okay, thanks, Rob. The points well taken. We're stronger coming up with solutions together, and it's an open book. So anybody else has any other ideas about how to pay for this kind of stuff, please bring it up. Bruce, you're next.
Yeah, thank you. And Rob, I just want to say I appreciate all the work you've done, because I know it's not an easy process that you're dealing with. It's real time and real people's lives. A comment on the capital, absolutely. Rob and I are in discussions with Anmar, but who knows? I'm not sure why they would agree to modify the 50-50 formula, but Rob's a very persuasive individual. I'm sure he'll pull that off. In any event, we are going to face those bills. It doesn't really, and I fully agree that ultimately we're going to have to pay that. And I fully agree with Neil's comment that the buildings are inadequate, and we particularly have to be respectful of those people who are volunteering to keep all of us safe. So I don't disagree with that. I see Ralph's note, frankly, as a technical matter. He had talked to me before. I said, look, the only difference it makes, frankly, is that you have to put a footnote in. Because I think as the agreement exists now, maybe the 4 million shouldn't appear in our financial plan, but I would certainly stick a footnote in saying we have every reason to believe we're going to see a bill between, and who knows, right, $3 to $5 million within the near future that will relate to a requirement for the Sasamat Volunteer Fire Department. I don't know how that would change the financial challenges we face. I guess it's similar to Rob's comment then. But I would rather technically be correct. And And maybe I can ask our financial advisor, if in fact this is billed by Sasamat Volunteer Fire Department, ultimately to all of us as taxpayers, because we're going to pick it up on our taxes, does it really matter whether it appears on our financial plan in the way it does?
Not in my view. Obviously, it could have been explained probably within the plan to provide more clarity, but I guess the bottom line is Belcarra is going to be responsible for a sum of money, and that sum of money is in the financial plan, and it's being funded from the sale of road ends right now at this point.
Yeah.
Okay, Bruce?
Yeah, thank you, Neil.
No problem.
And thank you, Ken.
Thanks. Carolina?
Thank you. Just to Bruce's and Lisa's comments. Yes, I honestly, personally, I don't agree to have as a lined item. I would rather have a footnote. It's not that we can run away and escape from building a new hall. It's being asked by the fire department for a while. We know the risks. We do want to give a better facility to our volunteers. They absolutely deserve. That was never in question if we need another hall or not. So I don't think that is what it's being questioned here. To Rob's point, I don't consider feedback from residents being noise. I think it's important for all of us to hear all of the concerns. And I think all of the concerns are valid, regardless if they come and attend every meeting or not. I think everybody's concern is valid and should be heard. It will affect everybody in a different way here, what we're doing. So I thank you for the feedback. I want to thank everybody for the feedback, for all the letters sent. Thank you. I think it's important for council to hear feedback, and I'm glad you're speaking up. For the tower option, for the reservoir option, I guess my thing here is I'm not convinced that that is the solution and that is the best way to spend our money on that. I believe that you could find, excuse me, can I just finish?
We're on Verna's letter.
I understand. Well, you let Rob speak to it, so you should let me too, to be fair, right?
Well,
So going back to the tower, no, Rob spoke about the tower, how people are, against it.
Okay, please go ahead. Let's go.
I don't think, thank you. I don't think it's that people are against. I think people are questioning, is that the only solution that we have? Is that the best way to spend the money right now, since we don't have much? So, so I'll leave it at that. I'm not in favor as keeping that as a lined item. I spoke about that a few meetings ago. I agree with Lauren, with Berta's letter. I think it should be a footnote on the budget. And also, I would want to see a number that came from a professional and not just from an assumption or what the other municipality did and this and that. I could also say that other municipalities like North Galliano have built their hall for $680,000 just 4 years ago. So there is solutions out there. And if people want to look up, just look up North Galliano Fire Hall, the new one being built. You will find it online, and you will find the price as well and the structure, So yeah, those are my comments for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Stuart. Stuart, you had your hand up? Stuart? I'm trying to unmute you, but you won't unmute. I can't unmute Stuart right now. Stuart, I can't unmute you. I'm sorry. Something's funny.
There, can you hear me?
Now I can hear you.
Hello. So in terms of the fire hall, I just wanted to kind of support your original comments, because it is a part of long-term capital planning. And, whether it's the fire hall, and despite all the variables from the Board of Trustees, which they may present to us, we need to have a budget line that represents the long-term planning for their replacement costs. You got to remember that the fire hall, the municipal hall, they're all plus 40 years old, and they're reaching the end of life in terms of, we should have been, or it might have been a good idea to be having these in the budget lines, quite a while ago, just so that by the time it gets to now, because like I say, this fire hall is 40 years old, the municipal hall is 40 years old, and there should be budget lines that represent the replacement for them.
Thanks, Stuart. I appreciate the comments, and fiscal responsibility is obviously something that we're going to have to continue to fight through. Carolina, you'd like to say something again? No? Yes? All right, go ahead. No? You're out? All right, you're out. Shall we move on then? Nothing else? Oh, Carolina's back again. Carolina, are you in or out?
No, I'm out. I'm sorry. It's freezing on me. I'm clicking it, but it goes back on its own. So please ignore it. I will put my hand up, or I will unmute myself and say something.
Okay, I'll lower your hand. I'll lower your hand for you.
Thank you.
All right. So we'll move on then to 8:10. And in advance of the Des Wilson letter, I have a letter from Jay Sharp that was received today, but it's specific to Des's letter. And so we couldn't include it on the agenda because it just came in today, but because it's specifically addressed to Des's letter, I'm going to read it, and then we can talk about Des's letter with this context already being known. Dear Mayor and Council, I have been quoted in a letter by Desmond Wilson that he sent to Council and appears in the April 27th meeting agenda. Mr. Wilson told me that he found the quote in the March 19th, 2019 Water Committee meeting minutes. I do not recall seeing these minutes prior to them being accepted and posted. The 7th bullet point under section 4.1 says that I said the outcomes of the Turtlehead and Sinclair Road fires would not have been different given additional resources. It is partially correct. However, it was recorded without the very important preamble comments that I made leading up to that conclusion. I have been asked this question several times prior to the March 19th, 2019 meeting, so I had a pretty much standard reply. The reason why the Turtlehead outcome would not have been substantially changed was the fact that when our first fire truck arrived on scene, the first house was already fully involved and the fire had already spread to the second house. It was a foregone conclusion that both houses were total losses. At the Sinclair fire, the outcome would not have changed because we were able to contain the fire to the attic space and save the rest of the structure and contents. I feel that Mr. Wilson's letter misuses my comments to make a conclusion that I was not making at the Water Committee meeting. So with that in mind, in advance of discussing 8.11, any questions or comments about Des Wilson's letter? Bruce, you have your hand up. Thank you.
Yeah, I actually wanted to comment on Chief Sharp's letter, because I had a conversation with him, Neil, and he made that point some time before, because I've heard that quote. For some reason, it's appeared a number of times, and it's obviously been circulated. To me, he made the obvious point that, in each case, Sasamat Volunteer Fire Department, they were able to contain the spread of the fire. So in both cases, you could say, well, you couldn't have done more than that, no matter how much you had in the way of resources, right? And the fact that things were quite clearly nip and tuck with respect to the Turtlehead fire, he indicated that, fortunately, with all the efforts made, that fire was contained, and because we were fortunate that we had soaking wet evergreens nearby, they didn't ignite. There was a pause because it was such a damp period. But the point he made to me was that his quote, and I really, when I think about the quote, it doesn't tell you much more than we didn't get a conflagration resulting from those fires. In fact, the fire department was able to contain them. So just that comment, but for some reason that one does pop up, and many people do respond to it. Thank you.
Thanks. I spoke to Chief Sharp about it as well, and he's very upset that the quote is being used to present a narrative that he wasn't attempting to address. Yes, the fire department, I was on both those fires as a fireman. Yes, we were able to protect the village from both those fires getting worse. However, that's specific to the circumstances of both those fires. Had it been drier from being later in the season, or even had it been windy, that those circumstances would have been completely different, and we can't assume that we're always going to be successful, because other circumstances like wind and time of year can make a big difference to what an outcome would look like. Bruce, you've got your hand up. Please go ahead.
If I could just add, Neil, I mean, I'm a few homes away from where that fire occurred. And certainly it looked very much that it could have gone either way when I was watching the work. And you and some of your colleagues carried a massive pump down a set of stairs that I wasn't sure would even carry that weight in order to get water on the base of that home. So no, it was truly an extraordinarily dangerous site. And the only other thing I would add is that Chief Sharp also said that had the trees ignited, which he was not clear they would not, had they ignited, he said they would have evacuated the entire head, pulled out the fire department, and called in the water bombers. He said, frankly, that was the choice you were facing.
Yeah, if the fire had spread and become a wildfire, if we hadn't been able to stop it from where it was licking the trees just uphill, it would have been over. Yeah. We had no more water left. Yeah. To your point, it would have been a completely different exercise in trying to protect lives as we managed evacuation. Yeah. Any other comments on Des's letter? Comments, questions? I'll answer a couple of questions.
Des has a question, Neil.
Yeah, Des has a question.
Okay, Des, I'll bring you up now. Des, just so you know, if you move your cursor to participants at the bottom, that's where you'll see an option to put your hand up. Just for anybody else in the gallery too, if you're having trouble finding where to put your hand up, you just move your cursor and click on participants, and you can see put your hand up. So go ahead, Des. Des, you're unmuted, but we can't hear you. Your mic might have a problem. Oh, sorry, Des. Des, I apologize. We're going to have to move on if we can't get your mic to work, and we can come back to you, okay? I'll leave you unmuted in the off chance you get it figured out. And I'll offer a couple more insights in response to your letter. On point number 4 about has thought been given to replacing both the Anmore and Belcarra fire halls with a new common hall? Of course. You have to be 8 kilometers though from the furthest extent of a municipality. And so there is not one location which provides 8 kilometers of proximity to the end of either municipality. So we are required to have the 2 halls separated. Everything else is pretty much available online. The point number 3 about assuming the local fire trucks and water supply will be of marginal value. When it gets into an interface fire, per the fire underwriter's survey recommendations, it's too late. The water that the fire department is asking for is to be able to have maximum flow to be able to stop the fire from spreading into and becoming an interface fire. And if there's any residual value in having the extra water, it's to be able to protect an evacuation route once it becomes an interface fire. But the fire department needs as much water as it can get to be able to stop an interface fire from happening. So that's why that's why the water supply is being asked for, not to be used to fight an interface fire itself. Are there any other comments for Des's letter? And we can try coming back to him if he can get his microphone working. All right, nothing. So to Ian Devlin's on 811, anybody have any questions or comments? Seeing nothing. Oh, Bruce, go ahead, Bruce. Bruce, you're muted. I'm going to unmute you, Bruce. Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm off. That's fine. Yeah, just this is. It was this and some of the other letters and the conversations I'd had with members of that water committee that led me to make the resolution that I did. I believe these are issues that they're very well qualified to offer us advice on. Thank you.
No problem. Carolina.
I took the words out of my mouth. I agree. I just wanted to thank them for their work, for their letters, and for reaching out when you saw that possibly we were going to the wrong direction, maybe, in your view. So thank you.
All right, see nothing else. I'll offer a couple of quick comments. The fire underwriter survey was attached to this letter, which is really important. Now, there's a distinction that I'm not sure that everybody is aware of. The fire underwriter survey is for the purposes of insurance. The volunteer fire department's request for additional water has nothing to do with insurance. So when looking at the fire underwriter survey, specific to the village's insurance rating or insurance qualification, there are a couple of things that are really, really important to note. Now, this is from 2010. The key details that the fire underwriter survey considered include that the Tatlow Reservoir would be expanded. Okay, so predicated on the Tatlow Reservoir being expanded as just one of the things, they say that that design would meet the minimum requirements of the fire underwriter survey. However, and recognize we didn't do that. So we don't, based on that design plan that they read, necessarily meet the fire underwriter's minimum requirements because we didn't expand that water reservoir. Okay, so there is a potential issue for us for the village's insurance. Fortunately, we haven't been audited since, but this just goes to show the fire underwriter survey as an insurance mechanism, we did not meet the design criteria. And they say this system would be, with that expanded reservoir, absolutely minimalistic with respect to providing water supplies for firefighting that will be recognized for fire insurance grading purposes. And steps should be taken to improve the water supply system on an ongoing basis to ensure that the risk within the community increases, that the capacity of water supply system also increases. So for the purposes of insurance only, which is what the fire underwriter survey is for, we do need to ensure that we have the village insured properly and protected, even based on this 2010 design response. Carolina, go ahead.
All right. So I just want to point it out that it is a letter from 2010, and there has some improvements that was made after that, like we up our flow from North Bend. There is all, well, Bruce could talk to that, but there was, I understand, a new system installed on this one reservoir here at Belcarra Bay that tells you when the tank is empty. Is that correct?
That was assumed the tank was full when they did these design recommendations.
Okay, okay.
So that
No,
improvement wouldn't count.
Okay, yeah, I just want to, and also perhaps we need the FUS to come here and do another test. There is a misconception that we're not insured. I just want to, you know, I saw this in a couple of letters, which is clearly not the case, because we had 2 houses that caught on fire here that was rebuilt by the insurance companies. So I want people to remember that. And also, you keep on saying, and that it would be to the mayor, you keep on saying that the Sasamad Fire Department requested a reservoir. I haven't seen there in any minutes. Well, you keep on saying that they request more water.
More
correct?
water. More water. Absolutely.
But there was never a formal request, because that is not written anywhere. As far as I know, you know, like it's pointed out in the letter, well, you want the maximum flow you can have, obviously. But as far as having a formal request for more water, there isn't one, correct?
They have presented, they have answered questions to council, to the water committee. If you were looking for a formal written request, you were asked after the last council meeting to submit any questions you'd like to have for preparation for the volunteer fire department to come and answer in another public forum as well. So if that's what you're waiting for, you had a chance to ask them for it. And
No. I'm asking what I asked is if there is any formal requests in written. So you said no.
In the presentations, they have said they want more water.
Yeah. As far as I understand, the Jay only came to talk to council once during a town hall meeting back when we were first elected in 2018. He hasn't gone back to talk to council, but I do understand he has talked to the water committee, which is great. So yeah, those are my comments. Thank you.
He spoke at a council meeting as well, I believe. Lorna, do you remember if Chief Sharp presented at a council meeting as well?
I know he has. I can't remember if it was for this council, but he has been to council before.
I didn't attend the water committee meeting, so I wouldn't have seen it there. And I'm pretty sure I've seen him twice. But either way, like I said, you could have asked questions, and he'll come back and present again. If you don't ask
you
the
know
question,
what? I prefer, after I saw the letters from the water committee, I prefer what Bruce did there and refer this back to them. Okay, and if I do have any questions, I will send it to Lorna. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, and hands just went down. Rob, go ahead. Your hand's up again.
Yeah, this comment is directed to Carolina. Carolina, at any time you can go to the trustees meeting, the fire trustees meeting, as I did and another resident did, and you'd be amazed at the comments that you hear there and the discussion that they have. We also have 2 trustees, and I would suggest that you might want to talk to them with what Chief Sharp says at those meetings. It's quite informative.
Thank you. Thank you, Rob. Yes, because you know, when you read the minutes, it's not as informative. I did hear from Lisa when I asked her, and she said that those meetings are open. So I would love to attend them next time, just to be in the gallery and hear. Thank you.
No other comments for 8.11. Let's move on to 8.12 for the letter from Martin Dubois. Any questions or comments? Carolina?
I just want to thank it again. I did it for Ian's letter, so I want to thank Martin for his feedback and for his hard work. I really liked his letter, and yeah, and it was very clarifying to me because I had quite a few questions about it. And so thank you.
Any other comments or questions? We can take for granted, as I mentioned at the last council meeting, but not this one. We do appreciate everybody's contributions, staff and gallery, so we don't have to ask them, and we don't have to say thank you every time individually. We do appreciate very much all the contributions. No other questions or comments? All right, Doug Brains for 8.13. Any questions or comments? Bruce. Bruce, you're muted. I can't unmute you for some reason. Now you're good.
Now I'm good. Yeah. You're fortunate that I was muted because I had a very loud dachshund beside me a moment ago. So he wanted to comment as well. I just wanted to say that this, like the other letters from members of the Water Committee, I mean, I think just points out that we have some very competent people there who I would like to see them explore those areas that they consider might offer us some useful suggestions. And that's it.
Thanks. Any other questions or comments? Probably worth mentioning a couple of things just to make sure the record is straight on this. Doug, I understand, has in fact, perhaps since this letter, spoken with the fire department about the compressed air foam system and learned that it is not appropriate. Also, on the Sinclair fire, I believe he has also spoken with the chief and now better understands that we in fact did run out of water, and the only reason we didn't go below those levels is because we had to actually stop the water flow on major nozzles and run smaller pre-connect hoses. And the District of North Vancouver memo, absolutely we considered, but it was more expensive than a water reservoir and thus would have cost more money as either a parcel tax or a sale of road end. So that's why we had opted, at least early on, to look at the reservoir as the most viable option financially for our current situation. Doug, why don't you go ahead, please? We can't hear you, Doug. Just a second. Go ahead. Now you're up. We got you.
Okay. I'd just like to say that at the Sinclair fire, the lowest level we got in the tank was 36% at the Tatlow tank. We were shut down, I know because you were probably on the monitor at the time, briefly, and I don't know how long it was, but if you look at the charts, you'll see that we never went below 36% in that tank. And we flowed for 1.5 hours at 35 liters per minute approximately, and continued to flow after a couple of shutdowns. So we got nowhere near out of water.
Let me add a little bit more to this because I was running the pump, not the nozzle. So I was the guy being told I had to shut down.
That's right.
I'm going to guess that we had to shut down no fewer than 8 to 10 times. And the nozzle we were shutting down was the one that was stopping the spread of fire in the trees above the house. It was the monitor. And so every single time we had to shut that down, the fire began spreading more in the trees while we waited for the water reservoir to go up and for Brad to yell at us that it was now okay to turn the nozzle back on again. And Captain Speakman was running the monitor. We also ran pre-connects, which were insufficient for putting the fire out, and the fire lasted longer as a result. And in fact, it was only when Captain or Chief Dave Gregory took one extra large hose around to where the pre-connects were unable to extinguish the fire on the side of the house next to an unburning house. Only when he took a separate line apart dedicated to trying to stop the fire were we able to actually put out the fire that continued to burn on the north side of the house. So we had massive fear that sparks, if they came through the house, were going to get into the tree and the monitor would not be available because we were told we couldn't use any more water. So regardless of where you feel that and I know Chief Sharp explained this to you already, regardless of where you feel that the 36% we didn't go below, we are required to maintain some water flow in the village as well. And for the system's integrity, I understand that's why we were unable to go below that, despite the fact we almost had the fire get into the trees out of our control.
Okay.
Chris?
I was sorry. Yeah, I was on that north side, by the way, for about 40 minutes. But and I was there when Brad had it shut down, but it was on that particular hose. It was very, very short. I don't know about what was going on at the monitor.
Agreed. Chris, our water engineer, please, you'd like to comment?
Yeah, about this exposure that you're talking about with the trees, it's a really important thing to understand from the fire underwriter survey side of things as well, is that a lot of people keep saying about the 30 liters per second or a 60 liter per second. A lot of the reason that people point to that is because there's a table with the fire underwriters and it talks about exposure. And typically when we talk about exposure, it's exposure to another property. However, I would be of the opinion in Belcarra, you're actually in a situation where your exposure is extremely high, as in 0 to 3 meters, because you have trees surrounding all your properties continue, which is fuel to let it jump to the next property, to the next property. So when people talk about the 30 to 60, you might, in fact, if you want to play the risk game, I would say you're actually in a higher situation, more like 120 liters per second, because you're so close with exposure distances.
Okay, thanks, Chris. It's consistent with my explanation earlier that we try to stop the fire from spreading to the forest, because once it gets to, it becomes an interface fire. All we're trying to do, and Bruce alluded to this earlier, all we're trying to do is help to maintain an evacuation path, because it's beyond our ability. We have to hit it with as much as we can get to stop it as fast as we can before it gets out of control, as per the fire underwriter survey, talking about making as many advances as possible for the quickest extinguishment of any fire before it gets out of control. Anything else for this letter? All right, let's move on to 8.14 with Ron Davis for the parking area on Bedwell Bay Road. Any comments or questions? Carolina.
Yes, thank you. So I just wanted to, I spoke to Ron on the phone too, because he called me, he was concerned about that. I just wanted to give a little bit of insight. So, so before the new signs went up, people could park on both sides of the street, all over. There was very few no parking signs when we became council. I do see, ever since those signs were put there, the bus stop was moved over there. So I do see where his concerns are coming from, even though I guess, everybody tried to pick the best spot for it. It was after the curve. It was after the 30-kilometer-an-hour zone. It was not in front of any houses. Those are wide spots that you can park, that you can fit a car there comfortably without going to the side of the bank. So back then, a few months ago, that seemed like a good spot. I can see where his concerns are now. I did tell him that this is up to staff and not council now. So, but I can see where his concerns came from. And I just wanted to point it out that that when this was decided, that's why we closed the other side of the road. So we wouldn't create that bottleneck, but it's still creating. We're busy, people go, people park there. I would be happy to see those spots move further down before the curve, or whatever staff prefers, but I do think it should be addressed because it is becoming a little bit of a concern and dangerous as people are, coming off the bus and trying to park and trying to do all that. I'm not in favor of resident-only parking around the village, but I do recognize that that is a red zone. It could, it is a bit dangerous right now in my view as well. So perhaps, like I said, moving those spots up or whatever staff considers that is appropriate. But yeah, I would like to see that addressed too. Thank you.
Deborah.
Oh, it's Peter.
Peter.
So,
Hi, Peter.
I don't know what red zone means, but I do drive by that area frequently, and as soon as the weather is nice, it's just tremendously dangerous there with way too much activity. And I don't understand at all why there's any parking there, possibly residents only, but it's not working the way it is. Too many people are coming in there and parking there and just walking down to the park so they can stay longer hours or not drive over the mountain to get in. I don't know really what's causing all the activity, but it's just not healthy and safe there. Sooner or later, somebody's going to get hurt badly, and then I'm sure we'll change it. But until then, we're just gambling with danger. Deborah has a comment too.
Go ahead, Deborah.
Hi. Yes, and just, and I think even if you move the parking back, you're still going to have the problems with the number of people that are coming out to the village now, especially with COVID. And the problem, like Ron in his letter and the pictures and what I've seen, is to do with people getting to that spot, there's no parking, and they do a U-turn. And so it's nothing necessarily to do with the bus stop, but it's certainly all to do with the parking along the road there. I think the sign at the entrance off Tumtume Wooten says picnic parking area. The problem there, they should say picnic and hiking parking area, because I think then people are going, oh, that's for the picnic, I'll go to the other place for hiking. So they're coming out here, and even if it's all full, a couple weeks ago, it was parked along the side where it's illegal as well. So that creates a lot of problems. I don't know. I'm a proponent for village-only parking, especially during COVID, because of the problems that it's creating. And yeah, that's all I have to say.
Nice. I'll offer just a bit quick update. Everybody will have noticed that we didn't have the town hall to gain more feedback and guidance on parking. It is obviously a big challenge, but with COVID, it's not an option. So in the interim, please continue to have the letters coming to staff so that staff can get a consensus of feedback for whether it's just specific areas or if there's a bigger push for a residential only parking solution that had been previously discussed. I think the sign up in Ammo right now is there is no recreational parking right by the fire hall, and Lions Bay, I believe, also has shut down all parking as well. So whether it's just for COVID or not, it's something that we should just continue to receive feedback, and please address that to staff so they can keep that in top of mind. Thank you. Carolina?
Thank you. So just to reply back to Peter Strzok's comment, when I say red zone, it's we used to call that back then. It's all the zones that have the majority of the problems. So Belcarra Bay, that side of Bedwell Bay. And also, that being said, if you do remove those spots, it's important to understand, because it has happened in the past when those were removed, that it will overflow somehow to Belcarra Bay. So then you would probably have to do some more resident parking around Belcarra Bay, so you wouldn't get that flow back here. And also to remind everybody, I agree with Deborah Strzok suggestion. Instead of having just picnic, maybe we could contact parks to say hikes as well. I agree with that. I think that's a great idea. And I would like to remind everybody that since COVID started, I'm grateful that parks did that. They put 3 electronic signs around the village, directing them. It was actually part of my recommendation to always have a sign by the entrance of the park to direct the park traffic that way. But once you come in the village now, it says local traffic only, okay? And people are still coming. They are trying to get people out of our roads with the COVID, because of the COVID, but people are still coming this way. So the only way that I can see if council wants to close all the off-street parking during COVID here, the only way I see that being able to do that, because I know not everybody's going to respect the signs, it's actually blocking those spots on the red zones, or what we call red zones. So you could put some cones, you could put, I don't know, big rocks, whatever. Cones is cheaper probably. And hope that not everybody will get out of their car and remove a cone to park there. And of course, enforcement is a big thing. So yeah, those are my comments. Thank you.
As you said, it's up to staff, so we'll let staff worry about that. That's their area of expertise. Alex, go ahead, please.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to ask, if we evaluated putting potentially some parking meters out there, I think that we're so fortunate to live where we live, and it's an amazing place. But I don't think we're going to be able to stop people from coming to do that hike. It's an extremely popular hike across the region. In fact, you know, my wife and I fell in love with this area doing that hike. But we've talked about being cash starved and having some financial issues. Have we looked at a cost benefit potentially on metering the road close to the trailhead?
Yes, and you would be amazed at how expensive meters are. They would never pay. They would never pay off. Alex, you're like the fastest commenter of all time. You're like zip right back to mute.
Short and sweet, yeah. Just keep it to the point.
No worries, keep it coming. So anything else on parking, 814? Okay, everybody remember, keep the letters coming. It's likely, as we see in all the other municipalities around, I hear from Metro Vancouver all the time, that parking is becoming more and more of an issue in every destination area. It's unlikely to get better after COVID. It's probably going to get worse. So let's keep the comments coming so staff has guidance. So 8.15 for the Hubs family regarding the sale of road ends. Any questions or comments? The only comment I'll leave is that it's great that the Hubs are now joining us. They weren't involved in a lot, or they weren't paying attention to a lot of the earlier communications. So we will continue to have full transparency at every step of the way, and look forward to your feedback as well. Deborah, you've got a comment? Or Peter? Oh, hang on a second. I'm trying to unmute you, but it's not working. If anybody else is, there we go, we're good.
First of all, does anybody else have anything? Because I've got quite a long thing to do with the road ends.
Sorry, well, no, so we're still going through our correspondence. We have 2 more to go. Deb, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
So do you want to hold yours for anything, any new business from the gallery until we finish our correspondence?
Sure, yeah.
All right. So if there's nothing else on 8.15, how about 8.16 from Paul Callio? Any questions or comments? All right, the only thing I'll say is that this is a letter that's a perfect example of someone who's only recently come back to the village and is not aware of all the public conversation and the resources available for every single thing we've done, nor the professional opinions or processes behind. And so we'll continue to recommend that you join us, Paul, and catch up, and also maybe talk with the fire department directly. They will also give you some insights to see why we're taking the guideline, they're taking the this line towards the need of additional water. Nothing else? 816. All right. New business. Any council members have new business to discuss? Going once. Going. Oh, Rob Begg. Go ahead, Rob. Rob, did you just pull out? All right, Lisa. Go ahead.
Hi. This is going to be crazy controversial. I'm not convinced that the fire hall should be on the 2020-24 financial plan at this time. I think it should be listed as a footnote that states that the anticipated costs have to be determined by the fire department. And just at this time, until there's an actual new plan, a new agreement between Anmore and Belcarra, I don't see how we can include it. So I'd like to address that through a motion if that's possible. I'm not sure.
Yeah, so what's your motion?
That the adoption of the five-year plan, financial plan, 2020-24, bylaw 559-2020 be withdrawn, and that the reference in the 2020 to 2024 financial plan scenario C be amended to reflect that under major capital projects provided for, a new fire hall in 2022 at a cost of $4 million be removed, and instead have the new fire hall recorded as a footnote that states an anticipated cost yet to be determined by the Saskatchewan Volunteer Fire Department Board of Trustees.
Councillor Wilder, do you remember we asked, we needed copies of your motions in writing? Can you give that to us? We can't read that.
So if you can if you can email that, it's not legible. Sorry, Lisa. If you can email, I think the motion goes on the next agenda anyways, correct, Lorna? So we have time to be able to put this
That's
on.
correct. It's a notice of motion. Mhm.
Yeah. So
Thank
you can email that and it'll go on to the next agenda for the next meeting and we can discuss it.
Okay, and I'll just tweak the wording a little bit. It's just that after reading Verna's letter and some other conversations, I'm just not quite yet convinced. So I'd like to put it as a footnote.
No worries. I encourage you to be prepared about what happens if the trustees say we need to do this and we have not got it in the plan. So just think about the what if we can't actually plan, then we're left with potentially fewer options. I just prep you because let's just get it worked out. I'm trying to give you as much guidance as to what the big challenge is going to be. If we remove it from a plan, obviously hope is not a plan. Let's talk about what the risk is and what the alternatives are, and let's have a good conversation about it next meeting.
I know just lots of people are so concerned about this $4 million number, and because we don't have that agreement, that's where I am. I won't speak anymore on that.
No worries. It could very well be worse than 4 million too. That's the worst part of this.
Possibly.
Yeah. So let's make sure we have a good discussion about it. Bruce, you're next. Oh, Bruce, hang on. I'm going to unmute you. Why is my unmuting not work? Go ahead.
I don't know. It allows me to unmute myself, which is good news, but
yep.
I don't know why you don't have that control. I'm actually bringing another topic up, so maybe if it's dealing with past topics, David or Robert might go ahead of me.
Okay, well, David's not counsel, so I'm going to let counsel go through it. So Rob, why don't you go ahead and we'll keep Bruce on standby.
I had a new topic as well.
Oh, then hang on. Let's go back to Bruce then. Bruce gets to go back. Raise your hand again. Raise your hand again, Rob. We're back to Bruce.
That's great. I'll just be very, very brief because it's been a long meeting. I just wanted to say further to some discussions and exchanges we'd had, Neil, I just wanted to bring counsel and those online up to date that one of the options that I think we may see available to us with the recent work by TELUS bringing in fiber optics to the community is the potential to improve the automated monitoring for fire and smoke alarms within the community. One of the points that became very clear, and I've done a fair amount of reading now, but even in discussions with the fire chief, is how critical it is that the Sassafras Volunteer Fire Department be notified as quickly as possible when there is in fact a fire. So the concept that I just have begun to explore with the TELUS representatives is the feasibility of virtually wiring every house in Belcarra such that there would be an automatic alarm and dispatch in the event that an alarm triggers from either smoke or fire. Because as everyone will appreciate, getting here a few 5-10 minutes earlier can make all the difference in terms of protection of homes. It also appears, if these are monitored systems, it appears to reduce the risk of loss of life by between 15 and 20%. So it's a notable improvement. It's very early in the processes. It's complex because it depends how we did it and how do you deal with those people who already have a system. And I'm very conscious that we don't want to create an overload for staff. So it's preliminary. I just wanted to mention it. And it's also something I will take to the water committee as one thing we should consider. Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce. Everything safety related is worth a deep discussion. I will add, I have been talking with TELUS from the very start of the conversation with TELUS, the goal to have thermal imaging cameras in all the high-risk fire areas around the public areas around the village.
Yes.
For early notification, and they said that is entirely possible. So not just what you described, but the possibility of having thermal imaging cameras to provide earlier notice of a fire that's not from a house is also something that we've been looking at from the start.
Yes, thank you. I did raise that because you mentioned it to me and you have mentioned it previously. The TELUS people I was talking to were not aware of their capabilities, but they did promise to go back and check with vendors to see what type of capabilities they had. Because, of course, one of our great fears here is a conflagration involving trees and forests. So it's not just the risk that a home starts that, it's there's a risk that a camper does or a hiker.
Yeah, agreed. Rob, you're up next.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring to everybody's attention the amount of debris that's starting to show up on the side of the road. Some people are doing their clippings, and I think they still expect to have some kind of a pickup, or that there were pickups in the past, and they still expect that it's a village problem. Also, there's a number of dump sites on Marine that are getting very full over the edge, and I think diligently our works boys should be taking a look at those sites and who's contributing to what's going over the edge. One instance that happened out on Turtlehead last weekend was somebody filled a pickup truck and backed it straight across onto village property and was unloading it. So I don't know how we address the issue, but there seems to be a goodly number of people that feel that village property is prime for dumping because they've done it for years. And I think it really needs to be addressed. It's a little bit out of hand.
We became aware of a dumping episode, and please, everybody, pass it on to other residents. Call the non-emergency RCMP line if you see any illegal dumping, especially from non-residents, if you're not comfortable having that conversation directly with them. So non-emergency RCMP line for any kind of dumping is the first point of call, please.
And Your Worship, I'd also suggest if they could take a picture or get the license number, that would be very helpful.
No question. Good call. Lisa, you've got your backup?
I've that in a couple of instances, Lorna, so we're happy to push them your ways. This is not non-residents. In most cases, it's actually residents. So just so everybody's aware of the fact.
Okay, thank you. Lisa, you're up. Oh, hang on a second, you're muted. Would you want to try unmuting yourself? Mine's not working.
There goes. Sorry.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Wrong button. Wrong button. Have we set a date for the pickup? Last year it was March, early March, and it was still snowing.
No, we won't be doing that until the COVID
Oh,
pandemic is lifted.
of course. Okay.
Okay. No,
Off to waste tech.
we're not going to allow any wildfires before COVID's done. We're not ready for it.
Thank you.
All right. If that's it for council, then moving to public question period, and David's iPad Air has been waiting for the longest time. David, do you want to go ahead? You may be muted. Can you unmute yourself, David's iPad Air? I'll see if I can help.
Your Worship, would you ask people to give their names and addresses?
Sure. David's iPad Air, unless your last name is unexpectedly iPad Air, can you give your last name and address as well, please?
Dave Goodman here.
And your address, please.
5163 Whiskey Cove Lane.
Thank you. Go ahead, David.
I just wanted to, looking at the minutes of February 10th, section 5.1, where the motion was carried that the scenario for developing 3 road-end properties pursued should legal means be achieved. But it seems to me that prior to doing that, you need to get a legal opinion with respect to whether in fact you can actually sell shoreland lots and use the money gained from that for the purposes which you plan to use it for. And specifically, it seems to me that it violates Community Charter section 41.1. And I thought the only legal opinion that I'm aware of that the village has seems to suggest that that's the case. You can't do it. So have you got a contrary legal opinion with respect to that, just for the shoreland lots?
Yes, we have, and we are legally allowed to do it. And there is, and this is another great example where we've been transparent about this from the start, and it's been communicated several times. The idea that it's not legal is not correct. We have a legal opinion saying it is 100% legal, and Lions Bay just did it themselves as an example.
Can I follow up on that then? I did email Lorna asking for that, and she wrote back a nice response, but it didn't say anything about getting a legal opinion specifically on the sale of shoreland road ends. So given that you're fully transparent, could I please have access to that legal opinion?
Lorna, is that something we can do when it comes? See, legal is the only thing I think that we have to do stuff in camera for. Lorna, can we share that legally?
We do not share the legal opinion as written. We share the general concept of it, but we do not share the actual legal opinion. But we never did anything that we were not allowed to do under the charter.
You're not allowed to share the legal opinion under the charter?
No, it's not what I said.
I missed what you said.
I said that we do not share our written legal opinion. We share with you what the legal opinion was, and we have received a legal opinion. And we provided that in different occasions.
Right, okay. Well, it seems to me that this is an occasion where that should be shared and that it affects the sale of village property. It's not a case of a legal proceedings against any single individual. The village has paid for that legal opinion, presumably. And so I would like to request it and verbally requesting it under the Freedom of Information Act. What else do I need to do?
Lorna?
If you want to request it under Freedom of Information, you do not do that verbally. There is a written process for that. And you can be in touch with me and I will advise you what that is.
All right, before I go to that.
Mayor Belinkie, other than that, Mayor Belinkie has advised you of our legal opinion.
And you could, David, you could approach Lions Bay and ask them about the legal opinion they followed before they sold theirs. They may also they'll have their own legal opinion, which I can almost guarantee you is not going to be ours.
Okay, but let me just follow up. Just, you keep insisting that there's this transparency. You've got a legal opinion, yet you weren't share that opinion with residents. Now, to me, that isn't transparency. So rather than going through the formal request for freedom under the Freedom of Information Act, I'm asking you as mayor to release that report either to me specifically or to any resident that wishes to see it. What is the reason for you not providing that?
You see me asking Lorna because I don't know what is appropriate and not appropriate to release, which is why I asked about protocol and referenced the fact that litigation is always done in camera, or legal advice can be done in camera as well. And we have other legal opinions that were done in camera. I don't have a problem with it being released whatsoever.
Okay, so there's no litigation involved here. Given that you don't have any problem releasing it, I now would ask Lorna if she would please release that information.
I will discuss this with the mayor tomorrow and we'll get back to you.
Thank you.
No worries. And you probably want to get Lions Bay's opinion anyway, so you can assess them both against each other. So I'd still encourage you to contact them. Is there anything else on the public question period? No other hands are up. Going once, Bueller. Oh, Deborah Struck. Nope, disappeared. You want to try and unmute yourselves, Deborah? My thing's not working anymore.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I think so. Okay, I think, of course, there's a lot of controversy or whatever around road ends. The bottom line is, I believe we need to build our reserves regardless, even if we're not talking about a water tank or a fire hall, which we need. Let's say the water pipes burst, the road washed out. We definitely need to build our reserves, without a doubt. And I first of all want to ask each counselor whether or not they think it's important for us to build our reserves. So that's the beginning. So is that okay if each of the counselors responds?
Of course, yeah. Why don't we'll just go clockwise on screen. Bruce, do you want to start first?
Yes, certainly. I accept the position that we are, as Rob said earlier, that we have inadequate reserves in a whole series of areas. I think it's completely understandable. I think what people sometimes fail to appreciate, though many of you who have been here for many years do, is that this is a very small collection of homes that became incorporated and, as we're discussing now, only acquired municipal water about 8 years ago. I mean, we have started from virtually nothing. The tradition had always been to pay as you go, and that works really well until you face the kind of costs that are being identified now. In addition to that, we will face pressures, I think, as I've said before, as the long-term capital planning process, which the province is promoting, as we advance into that. It was inevitable that we were going to face a requirement to increase our reserves and increase them considerably. So, yes.
Thank you. Lisa, you're next clockwise. Go ahead. Oh,
There we
you're
go.
good.
Thank you. It's counterclockwise for me. Yeah, absolutely, Deborah, and through the chair. Our reserves are low, no question, and whether we build it up from tax increase or sale of road ends or whatever, yes, we need fire halls. Yes, we need water for safety issues, to protect our firefighters, our village, our residents. How we go about it exactly, you know, like Bruce said, we're a small, very small community, and we've come a long way, baby, you know, from being a recreational village to where we are today. And what's happened has happened, and we just have to look forward and move forward. But absolutely, yes, we need to build our reserves. No question about it.
Rob, you're next, at least clockwise on my screen.
Mm.
You have to unmute yourself, Rob. My power is no longer here.
I think that there was a comment that was made by a previous mayor about that the past councils were working diligently on tangible capital assets. I'd love to see that report and how far down the road they got with it, because quite frankly, what we inherited was a 0, 0, 0, 0 wherever we seem to look. And it's a little bit frustrating for myself, because looking at the big picture, that usually speaks to planning or lack thereof, whichever may be. You know, our requirements for capital in any business and capital replacement, when you're depreciating your assets, which happens whether you like it or not, one of the ways of, in actual fact, being diligent is looking at what kind of tax increases you have to stay at par, if you will, as a minimum requirement. So unfortunately, I've been hammering at this, as everybody knows, since we were elected, and for good reason. What we're talking about is a minimum of what we can do, barring any kind of unforeseen event. So I have no problem justifying to any resident of a $4 million possible bill that will come for any item down the road, when that's something we know we have to do. It's not unforeseen. And I'm sure the accounting people that are looking at this are feeling the same feelings that I'm feeling. This is very frustrating. And as a council, I believe we should be taking the same message to the residents. And quite frankly, I'd like to go on record as saying, I don't think that's the case. So when I talked about clutter before, that's the clutter. The rumors that exist because people have not been upfront with the dilemma that this village is in. And quite frankly, that's going to be the last time I talk about it, because I've been talking about it now for so many months that I'm getting tired of listening to myself. So I'll leave it up to everybody else, but
You muted yourself. All right. Thanks, Rob. Go ahead, Carolina.
Thank you. Yes, I do think our reserves are low. I will say to you, though, I will make sure that every capital, at least for my part, that every capital project that we get involved in, that as much as I can, I will make sure that we get the best for our money. So I'm very, I guess you know me by now, Deborah, I'm very conservative when it comes to money. So I will always be looking for the best solution for what we can pay. Thank you.
Okay, I'll round it up with some data as I learned. So I originally had concerns financially, and that's what I was elected as what my top two issues for being elected were around returning the village to financial sustainability and then water protection. I thought we had real problems when I saw that before I got elected that we had a $750,000 minimum reserve bylaw that represented 6 months of operating reserves for the village. And in fact, we'd broken that bylaw by having less than 3.5 months of operating reserves. I couldn't believe that council previously had let that bylaw remain unchecked. And then I started to get exposed to the fact that with the provincial financial review, for example, at the end of the year, we were number 157 out of 164 for financial viability of all the municipalities in British Columbia. And that shocked me. There was no one even close, certainly around Metro Vancouver, for our debt to asset concerns. And then CBC said, hey, by the way, your previous council on its last year ran a deficit, which is supposed to be against the law, especially running a deficit when you're in net negative reserves, 2.5 million in debt. So then I became more concerned. And then I saw that the fire trustees had not put money aside for a new fire hall. And then I saw when we have $2.5 million plus in debt, and our borrowing capacity when the interest rates were lower was under $1 million if we had something go wrong. And we already had to have a referendum just to borrow in excess of what we're supposed to be able to borrow. So the quick summary is, yeah, I've got huge concerns. I see two mechanisms to get us out of the trouble that we're in: parcel tax and road ends. I believe that we're selling a road end to build a water slide is irresponsible, negligent, and ridiculous, despite the fact my kids would disagree. However, a road end or two required to remove the burden of debt that blocks us from being able to invest in critical life-saving infrastructure like a water reservoir. If there was ever a time to sacrifice a road end or two, and who knows what it's going to cost, but that would be my preference, not, especially after COVID, to issue a parcel tax to every resident and have the burden on the residents instead of a piece of property or two. So yes, I am fully committed to trying to help us get out of this 157 out of 164 and become a star in the Metro Vancouver family.
So that was my question. Thank you, everybody, for your answers. That was very good.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Is there anything else, Deborah?
Lorna has a comment on this topic.
Oh, so, well, Peter was just asking if Lorna has a comment
regarding this topic.
Regarding this topic. I don't know if that's fair to do, but.
Lorna?
Oh, I'm sorry, Your Worship. I follow what my council requests for me to do, and I'm happy to do that. So that's my opinion.
Okay. Just to that with the reserves, because I think a lot of people in the village are, like you said, thinking everything's just fine. We enjoy the village the way it is, and we've always been pay as you go, and everything's fine if we just. So the reality that we do need to build our reserves is very, very important. Now, the road ends, my concern is that, especially seeing the influx of people talking about certain road ends and trying to say don't sell them because of different reasons. And I think the sale is controversial. This started way back when the previous mayor said that road ends will never be sold. He was frequently known to say they will never be sold. And I'm just as guilty as the next that many residents, we just want to be able to have the privilege of that free land, some for storage, some for views, some for parking, some for green space, and many for access. And previously at least a decade or more ago, anybody that was encroached on the road ends had to pay some sort of a lease or something to the village. And for some reason that was dropped.
Or the province.
Or the province. So, and maybe Bruce, and I noticed Jamie Ross is on the call as well, could answer why it was dropped. And because that has now led people to believe the land is just free and clear and they can just speak up and say, no, don't use it. And I'm worried about moving forward. So why was it dropped that people did not have to pay the lease tax, whatever it is, to use the road ends?
I'm just gonna step in, Bruce, before you answer that. Jamie's not on trial here. He doesn't have to bear the burden of counsel and having to answer the question. I'd like to defend him and not having to answer, but maybe Bruce, you can offer some perspective.
Yeah, well, first, Deborah, I'm not aware of ever charging anybody for the use of a road end. I mean, the issue is, Rob and I have chatted briefly about this on other issues. Encroachment on public land is extraordinarily common in the village, and we've always tried to manage it where there was a problem. But we've had cases, and again, I point back to my earlier comments about people have to appreciate where this municipality came from. There are people who owned properties where we would discover when we were surveying, for example, even for a trail application, that they had a building, part of their home was on public land. And I'm not suggesting when that was done, it was ever done maliciously. It was simply that no one paid much attention at one time when construction took place in the village. So I do not recall there ever being a situation where the council decided to move away from a policy of charging for use of public land. There would be exceptions in some cases. I'm thinking about Marine Avenue and the leases that were issued to those shared lots down there, the waterfront properties. The water frontage where there's shared docks. There were former leases agreed to, but anybody who's worked through the paperwork associated with that, and I'm looking at Lorna when I say this, would be unlikely to want to be handling dozens and dozens of cases where we were trying to charge. That's not to say it's not worth looking at, just that there is an enormous amount of work involved in that. There was a general rule of thumb, I can recall from many years ago, that where we would tolerate, we would accept, quote unquote, beautification. It's all through the village, you know, and those are cases where some people have planted trees beyond their property line that would leave you the impression that their property line is several feet closer to the road than in fact it is. Where the trees weren't too large or where they weren't presenting a hazard or a risk, they generally were tolerated. But that, I'm not aware of anybody ever deciding that where we had a stream of income from leases of some form with the use of public land, that we stopped doing that. Now, Jamie may recall otherwise. I don't know. I don't recall it. So
I will. I'll just put in a plug for council this time as well. Council this time got to the point where they have declared a conflict also regards to road ends and some of this decision. That wasn't the case before. And I applaud council for the desire to uphold the transparency and confidence of residents that there's no perceived conflict in any of the work that's being done on road ends. They willingly stepped away. So, you know, to that note, David's iPad Air might even want to ask for the previous legal opinion that didn't allow sale of water access, and we could have the whole picture come out that way as well. My point is only that we're trying to do everything as transparently as possible. Legal opinions against and for will all have to be considered, and the conflict issue has been dealt with appropriately, and it's nice to see that the governance is working the way it's supposed to.
I don't know if Jamie had a comment because I saw him. Was Jamie going to say something?
Go ahead, Jamie, if you'd like.
Yep, thank you, and I appreciate your mayor looking to offer me relief from talking about any part of the work I did. Never had any hesitation to do it, and I'll certainly do it now. And I'm certainly familiar, I think, Deborah, you posed that either council or the provincial government stop charging leases. And my understanding is that the council never charged leases other than the waterfront ones on marine around the wharfs, and those are encroachment agreements. Those were the only ones. So there was no move for council to move away from charging because we never did in the first place. And second, if the province had that, I was on council since 1990. I was never aware of it, but it may be useful if you go back and check the facts around that. And if you bring something to this meeting that's helpful, rather than saying I heard this, but give us the authority that you would rely on. It'd be helpful for me. So thank you very much.
Well, Peter was saying because the property that he previously owned, the driveway went across and he was charged. Go ahead.
It's a long time ago. My best memory, it was from the province, not from the village.
Mm-hmm. But that he was actually charged. So it did happen. That being said, and I don't know if that means that the village can, I think because I'm concerned that moving forward with selling the road ends, that what will happen is people write in, like, so for road end 2021, there were a lot of letters to do with that. And so if there's letters that come in saying, please don't sell one and give reasons why, then council will have, and it's a vote. I cannot see all of council voting it to go ahead. They'll say, oh, well, these people said no. And I would hate for us to be in a position of not being able to earn money towards the reserves because everybody kiboshes selling the road ends, which we have to do something hard, like you said, Mayor Belenky, to do with either selling road ends or parcel tax. So that's my concern.
Yeah, it's a valid concern. So the luxury of having a road end beside a house is like winning the lottery. So of course people are going to be upset. I spoke with the mayor of Lions Bay after they sold theirs, and of course the adjacent property was very upset. And there's people will be upset if that's the case. We have the risk of the people who are affected directly by a road end being upset, or if we have to pay for something, a parcel tax, and every resident potentially being upset. So those are the tough choices that are yet to be determined. Road ends are being investigated. They aren't committed to being what we do. If the village votes to do a parcel tax, wow, so be it. If that's what if it's more important for every single resident to put the amount of money necessary to pay for our component of a fire hall or a water reservoir as we're going to have to go, the people have the right to say, no, we'd rather take that on as a parcel tax, but we're investigating the road ends so that we have at least the information available to know what we're choosing between. Okay. Not to mention, we're looking at every grant under the sun. So we're trying to offset the risk so that there's as few road ends or as small a parcel tax that would be required. And remember, these are only being considered because the village has no reserves. So that's why you see us having to raise property taxes, so we can take care of the fact that we've got long-term viability and have reserves for when another major purchase or safety investment needs to be made. We wouldn't have to do this if the village had money in the bank.
So we will have to do hard things.
You know what, we don't save for a rainy day. Someday you got to buy the umbrella. And in this case, our umbrellas are big ticket items, which is why we can't afford them. Anyhow, thanks for the comments, Deb. Are there any other comments from the gallery? It's been a long meeting, but I thought it was really important to make sure that we had a big conversation on it.
Am I allowed to ask another question? Totally.
No one else has their hand up, so go ahead.
Okay. I was on the tree committee and we were looking at different things, and I was out wandering down Watson Avenue and saw some trees cut, and they were on public property or the city land. And I never saw any markings on there or anything. So can anybody explain to me what was going on there?
Lorna?
Deborah, if you'd like to call the village, I'll explain it to you.
Okay, so trees can be cut on village?
Like I said, it requires an explanation. So if you'd like to contact me, I'll let you know.
Okay, thank you.
All right, any other questions, comments before we move to adjourn? All right. Well, for technology in the COVID day and age, I'm actually really happy with the way that this went for everybody to get a chance to speak and for the governance. So thank you everybody for your patience as we have to manage the technology and for paying attention. Please tell everybody you know what you learned here today and bring back your challenges for the next meeting. We'll continue to work through this stuff all together. If it was easy, we wouldn't be doing this. It would be done on its own. So let's keep plugging through this, but don't stop being engaged just because you saw one meeting. Please keep coming out and help us through these tough decisions. All right, everybody. So thank you to council and to all the residents and the staff. Stay safe, everybody, and we'll see you for the next one.
Motion to adjourn.
Oh, for crying out loud.
Adjourn, yeah.
Move to adjourn.
Move, so moved.
All right,
Second.
Lisa moved. Carolina second. All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Good
None
night,
opposed?
everybody. Sorry, Neil.
Motion carried. There we go. I got ahead of myself.
Hey, thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.